Thank you for joining us today. I hope you all are doing well. My name is Anurag Bhaskar. I'm an assistant professor at Jindal Global Law School, OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat. And I'm honored today to welcome you all on this special day, special occasion, the 131st birth anniversary of Baba Sahib Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar. Baba Sahib Ambedkar was not only the chief architect of the Indian Constitution, but also a social revolutionary, thinker, and scholar whose contributions and influence affect our country and society every day, even now. And to honor his vision and celebrate his legacy, we at OP Global University have organized Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture on the topic Dr. Ambedkar's Thoughts on Socially Inclusive Nationalism and Democracy. The lecture will be followed by a seminar on the theme Revisiting Dr. Ambedkar's Conception of Democracy and Constitutionalism. The memorial lecture, the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, is being delivered by our distinguished guest for today, Professor Dr. Sukhdev Thorat. Professor Thorat is Professor Emeritus, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and Chairman of the Indian Institute of Dalit Studies, New Delhi. Professor Thorat also holds the distinguished Professor Chair at Savitribai Phule University, Pune, and K.R. Narayanan Chair for Human Rights and Social Justice, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala. Professor Thorat has previously served as the Chairman, University Grants Commission, and Chairman, Indian Council for Social Science Research, and he has received several awards for his public service for the marginalized communities, minorities, and in the field of education. We are privileged to have you among us today. Thank you for joining us. We are also honored to have among us Professor Dabiru Sridhar Patnaik, the Registrar of OP Jindal Global University, Professor R. Sudarshan, Dean, Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, OP Jindal Global University, and Professor Upasana Mahanta, Dean, Admissions and Outreach, OP Jindal Global University. I would like to thank these distinguished speakers and guests for joining us today. And I would now like to request and invite the Registrar of the University, Professor Sridhar Patnaik, to present his welcome address on this special occasion and events that we're having today. Professor Patnaik, I humbly request you to join us.
Thank you so much, Anurag, and good afternoon, everybody. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Sukhdev Thorat for taking time out of his busy schedule to grace this program. I would also like to thank my colleagues, Professor Jadumani Mahanand and Professor Anurag Bhaskar, for convening this important program to commemorate the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I also take this opportunity to thank my colleagues, Professor Sudarshan, Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, and Professor Upasana, Dean of Admissions and Outreach at the OP Jindal Global University, for agreeing to participate in the program. I take a moment to express my gratitude to all the distinguished invitees from within the university and outside the university who have agreed to participate in the seminar this afternoon. Let me begin by saying there can be no better way to honor and commemorate the contributions of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar than by instituting a memorial lecture in his name and conducting a seminar. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, as Anurag alluded to, is an inspiration, and considering the exalted position he occupies in our collective memory, it is indeed our privilege to honor his contributions as a visionary leader. He served the nation by protecting and building a cohesive society. It is befitting that the lecture focuses on Dr. Ambedkar's ideas on socially inclusive nationalism and democracy. Dr. Ambedkar always believed that democracy is essential in imparting and having social justice, and encouraged people to participate in the political processes to strengthen the country. To him, and I quote, democracy is not a form of government, but a form of social organization. In the views of Dr. Ambedkar, political democracy cannot succeed without social and economic democracy. For him, the best way to achieve socio-economic democracy is by achieving political democracy in the first instance. The coexistence of all three democracies is indeed critical to achieving equality and fraternity goals as enshrined in our Constitution in the preamble. As a leading institution, OP Jindal Global University is dedicated to public service. We pay tribute to Dr. Ambedkar by organizing a memorial lecture in his name, followed by a seminar on Dr. Ambedkar's ideas on democracy and constitutionalism. This is indeed an opportunity to reflect and revisit Dr. Ambedkar's philosophy. A distinguished scholar and academician, Professor Sukhdev Thorat, is with us to deliver the lecture on the theme of Dr. Ambedkar's ideas on socially inclusive nationalism and democracy. In a short while from now, my colleague, Professor Sudarshan, will introduce the speaker and the theme of the lecture. And I believe that Professor Thorat's lecture on this topic will be a great learning experience for all of us who are part of this program and to everybody from within the country and outside the country who have joined this program virtually. Moreover, we are certain that participation in this program will broaden our understanding on aspects in relation to democracy and inclusive nationalism. As my colleague Anurag mentioned, the memorial lecture will be followed by a seminar, and the seminar will have two panels where scholars will discuss the ideas of democracy and constitutionalism and their interconnectedness with the philosophy of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. And I'm sure that the ensuing discussion will bring ideas that can enhance the relevant social discourse in India. On behalf of my own self and the entire JGU community, we also express our deep sense of gratitude to our Vice Chancellor, Professor C. Rajkumar, who is not present with us this afternoon as he's on an official travel outside the country, but he sends his greetings to the distinguished speaker and all the participants. And I take this moment to express our gratitude to the Vice Chancellor for his able leadership and singular commitment to the idea and functioning of the university, which is today ranked as the number one private university in India. I am also grateful to all the stakeholders, including the regulatory bodies, the Ministry of Education, and the Government of Haryana for their constant support to the mission of the university. In closing, I would like to say that I'm confident that through our efforts this afternoon and commitment, we will be able to educate more and more people and encourage them to work towards a cohesive society for nation building. I again extend my gratitude to Professor Thored and all the distinguished panelists and speakers and all the audiences who have joined us and who are attending this program for taking time out to make this program a success and to contribute to knowledge construction and the ideals and ideas of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Patnaik, for highlighting the contributions of Dr. Ambedkar and for your kind of constant guidance and support which you have given to me and my colleagues in hosting this event. So I would now like to welcome Professor Sudarshan, the Dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy, to introduce the speaker and the theme and to share his thoughts on this occasion. Professor Sudarshan.
Thank you very much, Anurag. Thank you, Sridhar and Jadumani and Upasana, and of course, Professor Thorat for joining the opening of this, the Ambedkar Memorial Lecture and the seminar to follow. I'm particularly pleased to be asked to join this. Any one of the 12 deans in the university might have been asked to do this. But what Jadumani and Anurag may not know is that I grew up in a town called Kolar Goldfields. And my first consciousness of a political leader as a child was Dr. Ambedkar, because that town, KGF as it's known, is filled with statues of Dr. Ambedkar, and it is the one constituency that very frequently elected a member of the Republican Party of India to the legislature in Karnataka. And so I've grown up with, with a, a population that greatly admired Dr. Ambedkar, and we had many events in our school as well as elsewhere. Now and then after I left the town, it's now a ghost town, there's no mining, but there was a big hiatus when people seem to have forgotten Dr. Ambedkar. And now again, there seems to be a fervor of all manner of people wanting to appropriate the legacy of Dr. Ambedkar and claim that, he's been their inspiration and their lodestone and so on. Well, that's very good, but it's a moment for reflection as to what's happening in our society. And so this is a very timely theme. I think you called it discussion on Ambedkar and democracy and constitutionalism, because very often in the past, Dr. Ambedkar was seen as a champion of the underdogs and the dispossessed, and the person responsible for, at least in the Constitution, abolishing untouchability. And so he was associated with caste and reflections about what it means to have a caste society that India is. And not enough attention has been given to the fact that he was an extraordinarily original thinker in terms of what democracy ought to be. Not as Dr. Patnaik mentioned, he didn't simply think of it as just a form of government, but he saw in democracy a revolutionary potential to bring about very important and radical changes in society. And so his ideas on what it takes for democracy to work are very valid. And his ideas and emphasis on what might be the dangers of democracy, which is simply a window dressing. He thought the Indian soil was not quite ready to be able to appreciate the full potential of democracy. So I think it's important that at this present moment, when we are concerned about the state of democracy in this country, we must think about Dr. Ambedkar. He's not the first, but he emphasized this about the value of constitutionalism, which is to place limits on government. And that's especially important when there is a danger of of what's known as the tyranny of the majority. And I think that is very prescient at this point in time, because his continual he was a extremely acute thinker about how forms of institutions can affect outcomes, right? We teach students that if you have a first past the post system, you will get an outcome where there might be someone who gets the seat but who's got a very small percentage of the total electorate's votes and so on. But in that respect, he was very acute about this, about the consequences of a first past the post system, of parliamentary democracy, of a party which can easily acquire a majority. Then what do you do about minorities and those who will not, under this system of democracy and elections, get due voice and state and have a say? And that's why initially he argued for separate electorates. Everyone knows about the famous confrontation with Mahatma Gandhi and the Pune Pact. And so one other point about Dr. Ambedkar is that he was a magnanimous man. He wasn't cussed in the way he conducted his politics. He did his job whenever asked, given a responsibility, carried it out to excellence in outcome. Dr. Thorat has already been introduced by Anurag, but I would have to say one thing that not many people may know is Dr. Thorat has written a piece of research, a wonderful piece of research on Dr. Ambedkar's contribution to water policy in this country. And it's fascinating because he was a minister, in the government till 42 to 46, I think it was, when he held the responsibilities for irrigation, water, electricity, and made immense contributions to that. I mean, the Damodar Valley Corporation, the Hirakud Mahanadi project, and so on. So, and it's wonderful to read Dr. Thorat because everything that he writes is full of acute analysis and empirical information. So, in fact, the first time I came across a select list of Dr. Ambedkar's publications is in the appendix to this report that he did for the government of India to commemorate Dr. Ambedkar as a great contributor to water policy in India. And therefore, by extension, I think one of the things that we need to study, maybe it's the theme of the next lecture, would be about Dr. Ambedkar and his contributions or his ideas about the environment, particularly when we are all concerned about the environment and climate change. So I don't have to say much more because I'm also a participant in the panel later. I have to reserve some thoughts to that. So I'll stop here and say that, you are in Dr. Thorat, we have someone who, like Dr. Ambedkar, right, has held important offices, chairperson of the UGC, the ICSSR, and great teaching experience in JNU. And therefore, and in all of these roles, Dr. Thorat has been, like Dr. Ambedkar, produced consequences of excellence. I mean, an internal standard of excellence. I wouldn't say that the entire system permits you to realize whatever you wish to. There are a lot of external constraints. But given that, you have to admire individuals who have an innate and internal sense of excellence and live up to fulfilling and meeting their own standards of excellence. And in that respect, Dr. Thorat is an exemplary scholar and person who served the country. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan. Thank you for sharing those insightful views and interesting facts about Dr. Ambedkar's work and for sharing Dr. Thorat's work and its contribution. And I'm also grateful to you for pointing out some issues for future discussion. So we at the university will plan to do more events like that. So thank you so much. Now I would request our chief guest, Professor Sukhdev Thorat, to deliver the lecture, and we have been waiting to listen to him. So Professor Thorat, over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Anurag. I hope I am sufficiently audible.
Yes, sir. You're.
Yeah. I am speaking from Nagpur, where the frequency of I am being out of electricity is quite often. So I have put my laptop on charger. As and when there is no electricity, I will switch on to the laptop, which will run on its own. So if it happens, give me a time in between. But at the moment, I am on the desktop. Well, Professor Sridhar Patnaik, the registrar of the university, Professor Sudarshan, Upasana Mahanta, Jadumani Mahanta, and the Vice Chancellor, who is not here, Professor Rajkumar. Well, I have interacted with him on several times. Professor Sridhar Patnaik, please convey my wishes to him, good wishes to him. I must make one or two preliminary remarks before I switch over to my lecture, that I think the Jindal University has not only achieved the excellence and occupy a prime position in the country. I think one of the features that I notice is that it has brought diversity in its faculty. And I think that diversity is possibly one of the reasons why you have been able to achieve those excellence. So my appreciation and congratulations that university has been socially inclusive in many respects. Friend, when Anurag Bhaskar asked me, I have shared with him that given the atmosphere today, I have been sort of reading Dr. Ambedkar's views on future of democracy in India, and of course the future of nation in India. And therefore, I would like to share my understanding of Dr. Ambedkar to the extent I can absorb it. I am essentially an economist, but you cannot avoid reading Ambedkar's other than his economic thought. So I decided to share my understanding about Dr. Ambedkar's thinking on democracy and nation and nationalism and nationhood. Now there are difficulties while pursuing or understanding the views of Dr. Ambedkar on these two concepts of democracy, political democracy, and nation. These difficulties I tried to solve by adopting a particular way. The first thing is that there is a tendency among the political scientists and others to judge Ambedkar's views on democracy and nation and related aspects only confining to his intervention in the Constitutional Assembly. Or for that matter, some of them, they go back to the 1935 Act or his memorandum to the South Bureau Committee or Simon Commission and 3 roundtable conferences. That is correct. I think that's the correct way of doing it. But my view is that, yes, in addition to that discussion which he expressed his view, the limitation of taking that material to understand Dr. Ambedkar's view is that being a chairman of the Constitutional Assembly Adopting Committee, he was also representing the views of majority, which was essentially a Congress majority at that point of time. And on many occasions, he has to justify it. A majority view, he has to justify. And therefore, at some time, and quite often, we should take that justification as his view. But on many occasions, his justification of majority view is not necessarily his own personal view. Therefore, we have to draw a distinction between what Ambedkar's original views are and what he was required to present and justify in the Constitutional Assembly. Therefore, with the approach that I will follow, and I have a feeling that those who work on Ambedkar should examine his view on the basis of his original writing. And therefore, I will follow that view, and therefore I will present you the Ambedkar in his as reflected in his original writing. Not exactly what he said in the Constitutional Assembly, and that is also beyond my capacity. It's a massive exercise to know his view on each of the topic, or even for democracy. I take into account a couple of his lectures, which are basics to understand his view on democracy and nationalism. I think his last lecture on 26 November 1949 is an important lecture where he has given warning. Where he said that while we are happy, and he said, my mind is full of worries. And he has given the example of how our own people were part of the game where we lost our freedom. I was always surprised that why he's expressing the worry. There is no princess and various others rules. But I think I could now see that his worry was that there was internal ideologies which he was worried about, and whether that ideology itself will pose a danger to democracy or nationhood. I think that was his worry, and I think in many respects it has come true. as a matter of fact, my feeling is that he issued many warnings in that lecture on 25th of November. People quote that very famous quotation that we have accepted political democracy in the sense of having one vote, one person, but we are far away from establishing one man, one value, and that is necessary provided you have social democracy and economic democracy. That is true. But I think there are other warnings that use of violence and the Bhakti Puja, and the other warning that he has given, those warnings have come true now. And the constitutional warning of constitutional morality. However, constitution is good, if the people, those who are implementing, they are a bad lot, the constitution will fail. And however, constitution is bad, but the people who are implementing it is good, then constitution will succeed. So there are many warnings that he has given that has come true after 75 years, I think. But I will not go into that. I think what I have done is I have picked up 3 questions. That what is his concept of democracy, which everybody of you know, you have already make a mention, but I'll go into little more detail. Secondly, what are the conditions necessary for success of democracy? And his warning that those conditions should be met, fulfilled, otherwise democracy will be a working democracy, it will not be a real democracy. I think these are the 3 issues on which he has applied his mind, and which I would like to share with you based on his own writing, not on interpretation. And at the end, then related issue will be, of course, the issue of his concept of nation and nationhood and nationality. That will be a sort of big discussion. Now, the literature that we can draw upon Ambedkar's original thoughts, I think are reflected other than the Constitutional Assembly debate, which I don't take those into account at the moment. We should take some of it, but I will confine to his 2 lectures. One lecture, of course, his 25th November lecture in 1949, Thanksgiving ceremony is important in a general way. But his lecture in Dehevi College, Jalandhar, where he has explained what is democracy and the related aspect, the basis on which the democracy is founded. The second is, of course, the lecture that he has given in the Law Library of Pune University, where he has specifically mentioned the condition necessary for success of parliamentary democracy. So put together these 2 articles, 2 lectures of his, which are academic lectures, as if he has written a paper on this, we get an idea of what is the meaning of democracy in his mind, what constitutes political democracy, what conditions are necessary to realize that democracy. I think these are very important. And the third one is, of course, the state and minority. Here is state and minority was the memorandum he submitted to the Fundamental Right Committee after the chairman of the Fundamental Right Committee asked his member of their Fundamental Right Committee that they should share their ideas what political structure we should have, what economic structure we should have. And Dr. Ambedkar, in fact, gave his memorandum, and instead of giving a memorandum and views on what should be the political structure, he produced a parallel constitution. State and minority is Ambedkar constitution, as a matter of fact. So if somebody wants to see what is the constitution as far as Ambedkar is concerned, Dr. Ambedkar is concerned, it is a state and minority, where he has given alternatives. He has suggested an improvement over the British parliamentary system in adapting to the Indian situation. He has gone far ahead and given the concept of economic system to be adopted to realize the parliamentary democracy, and therefore gave a concept of constitutional state socialism as a matter of fact. So in my view, there are other state writing, but these 3 pieces are extremely important if we want to understand Dr. Ambedkar's views on democracy. On nationalism, I think he has not really written in a form of a long write-up or anything, But thoughts on Pakistan, if you really look at chapter 1 and chapter 2, he defined nation and nationalism, very lucid definition of nation and nationalism, nationhood, and also the condition necessary for socially inclusive nationalism or nation. And that he repeated a couple of times here, and same idea is repeated in Rande Gandhi and Jinnah. Same idea is repeated in, you find some thread of it in Annihilation of Caste and other. So this is the literature that I will use to share with you as to what Dr. Ambedkar's views are on democracy. So let us therefore begin with what is democracy. I think it is too elementary for you people, and it was too elementary even for Dr. Ambedkar to talk about defining democracy, but Dr. Ambedkar does that. He literally gives the list of authors and what is their definition, and then he gives what is my definition. So I think it will not be a bad idea to repeat it like an undergraduate class, but that is very important because that is Dr. Ambedkar's, the way he did that. In that article, you know, Ambedkar write in DAV College and as well as the Pune, I will combine them together, but Pune, DAV College particularly, where he says that personally speaking, I am very greatly attached to the parliamentary system of government. So one has to see that ideologically speaking, conceptually speaking, Dr. Ambedkar ideological position was that he liked parliamentary democracy, support parliamentary democracy. That is very important with all its limitations. And therefore, he was very concerned that how could we make, while we adopt parliamentary system, this is the best compared to the totalitarian form of government or monarchy, but we should also understand the condition which will make it successful. Then he gave the definition of democracy by quoting Walter Begott, all of you know. And he said, democracy is a government by discussion. That any decision that you take in legislature has to be through discussion, has to be common consensus. That's the key thing of democracy, which he has singled out. Then, of course, you pick up on Abraham Lincoln, the government of people, by people, and for the people. So essentially here that the representative of the people who elect their representative, they govern, and they govern on behalf of people and work for the people. Now this I am saying simply because this is too elementary to say, because he has interpreted this in a very intelligent manner later on. Just to give you an idea before when I will say about this thing, because he mentioned, when he talked about the threat to democracy, he mentioned that the people increasingly, because of the bad working of the democracy, people increasingly began to think that they don't care much about whether it's a government by the people, of the people, as long as it is for the people. And if the government is for the people, they don't care whether it is really a genuine representative or total or other representative not came properly through the process of democracy. That is why I have given, and I'll come to that. That's a very powerful prediction of Dr. Ambedkar, and that is what happening today in many ways. So I think this is what it is. That is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And it is of course distinguishable from monarchy and other forms of the government. At other places, he also talk about democracy is governance by rule of law, rule framed by the representative of the people. So the democracy works, decisions are taken by the legislature or administration as per the law. So rule of law is a very important aspect of the working of the political democracy. And then he comes to his own definition, which is very important. He generally agree with all these definition, but he emphasized more on the aspect of method used in the democracy. And I'll read it for you. You know that. A form and the method of government whereby the revolutionary changes in the economic and social life of people are brought about without a bloodshed. So you can see that how emphatic he is about the method used in the democracy. So he defined in terms of method, the non-violent method used for a radical revolutionary changes in social and economic life. So revolutionary changes in social and economic life is important things, but the method used, they have to be without bloodshed. He used the word bloodshed. So the commitment to the democratic method and non-violent method is far beyond in case of Dr. Ambedkar. In that 25 November lecture, he laid down certain conditions. I think use of violence method, he shared with the member of the Constituent Assembly. He has to be foregone now altogether. He said it was all right. He not only the physical violence method that involved physical violence, but also civil deobedience and strike and other thing, non-cooperation which Gandhiji used. He said it was all right at that point of time when British government was there. But now there is no reason why we should use this non-democratic method when we have the government and where discussion is open. Discussion as a method of negotiation and pursuing the issue can be used. So I think this non-violence method is a key to Ambedkar's concept of democracy. I reflected on this. Why is it that he's emphasizing so much? Because later on you can see that he talked about the democratic socialism also. That's why he brought democratic socialism as against the Marxian socialism, non-democratic socialism. But I think my feeling is, I would say later on, but I will mention here itself, my feeling is that he was extremely worried about the violent character of our society and the totalitarian character and lack of freedom in Indian society, which is based on caste system. And you can see now the use of violence by the society. So he was worried that if there is no democracy, if there is some sort of totalitarian government, and that there is a potential, there is inbuilt in our Hindu society, the violence is inbuilt, it could be used at any time. And therefore, he emphasized non-violent method to the core and repeatedly emphasized. Now, this is the definition of Dr. Ambedkar. But basically now, if we want to summarize all that, that basically he certainly is favoring that the democracy is the government which is governed by the representative of the people, elected by the people, and the mandate given by the people is that this representative work for them, that the decisions are taken by discussion, and that the decisions are taken in a non-violent manner. And all this system of governance should be used for the revolutionary changes in social and economic life of the people. I think that is what I can summarize from his repeatedly writing at different places about the definition of the democracy. Now, he also pondered about what exactly is the parliamentary democracy, the British type of parliamentary democracy. Now, I can only mention about, he talked about political structure, he talked about social structure, and he talked about economic structure. Now, his general complaint about the British parliamentary democracy is, before I go to the feature of each of the aspect, political, social, and economic, his complaint is that the British parliamentary type of system only defined the political structure. And what does political structure involve? I'll come to that. And his complaint is that it doesn't include the economic structure, although it includes the social structure in the sense that you accept the equal right and equality before law. Conservation, you are internally, what you are doing is you are denying inequality and denial of equal rights. So to that extent, you bring the social structure and civic right. But economic structure, he was not very, very happy that the economic structure is left to the legislature. It is not made a part of the constitution. The private economic structure is maintained, and any changes in that is left to the legislature. It is not made a constitutional law. So, he's also asking for the going one step ahead of British parliamentary system, when the developing country applies the parliamentary democracy. He said we should learn from the mistakes and limitation of the parliamentary democracy, British parliamentary democracy. I'll come to that later. But the features of the political structure, they are known to all of you. You are in the law university. That political structure essentially defines fundamental right with equal political right, one vote, one person, representative from the representative form of governance, rule by elected person, negation of hereditary rights, and then the laws govern the governance. Executive is the major element which involved in policies, who undertake policies on behalf of the representative. That there existed opposition party is very much keen. He emphasized several times that there is a necessity of opposition party. In fact, when I come to the condition necessary for the success of parliament democracy, which he discussed in the law library lecture in Pune, the opposition party, existence of opposition party, he has emphasized several times, very emphatically, because he says that the people should know the other side, and people should know the other side. Therefore, you require the opposition party. The need of the fair election, that is another important aspect of the parliamentary democracy, and that the government servant, the administration, they are neutral in the election to any particular party. These are some of the aspects of political structure of the parliament democracy that Dr. Ambedkar highlighted. I am not adding anything from outside. I am only verbatim presenting to you what Dr. Ambedkar has written in this, so that we understand his original thinking. He also talks about the social structure in parliamentary democracy, and that is essentially related to the political structure, that the civic right, the cultural right, and religious right, and fundamental rights are assured, and economic rights are assured by the Constitution, as against the negation of what is contained in the caste system. Also, the duties are laid down. The duties of the citizens he has laid down, mentioned at a couple of times. Then the economic structure, of course, that he mentioned that the British parliamentary system keep away from defining economic structure and including and making it a part of the constitutional law and leaving it to the legislation for any change. So this is his understanding of the parliamentary democracy that was conceived or that was handed over to the Constitutional Assembly or to the developing country by the British. Now, taking this aspect into account, definition of parliamentary democracy, what constitutes parliamentary democracy in terms of political structure, social structure, and economic structure, we now go to the condition necessary for success of parliamentary democracy. This is 1951 Jalandhar DAV College lecture. The title of the lecture is this. So these are the original views. These are independent of the discussion in the Constitution. Constitution was over, and he was free to say what he want to say. Now, there are 3-4 conditions he has laid down, which I think we should understand. First is that there should be the inequalities should not be that large. He's not saying that there should not be inequality. Economic inequalities are a part of the economy and the society, but he argued that social inequality and the economic inequalities undermine Constitution. The social privileges, the way Constitution view, economic privileges, his word is tilt the weight of power towards those who hold economic and social power. Very, very powerful sentence of his. So the inequalities, reduction of inequality, minimization of economic and social inequalities is a precondition for success of parliamentary democracy, political democracy. Therefore, this word he has used in November lecture, social democracy and economic democracy. He has not defined, in fact, social democracy, what social democracy constitute, what economic democracy constitute, but we can understand that very, very easily. Now, coming to the social inequalities, he has a very powerful and original thinking. which I believe he was influenced by John Dewey in Columbia University. He was a philosopher. He has John Dewey has laid down several conditions or important conditions for success of political democracy. He was influenced by him. So we can see that he has quoted and he has mentioned about John Dewey. Now he has mentioned, and I will read it out because it's better to understand his own word. Democracy is not a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living. The roots of democracy are not located or embedded in the social. The roots of democracy are located and embedded in the social relationship, in the terms of associated life between people who form society. Interpersonal relations should recognize equal social rights and practice in relation to each other. Democracy is a way of life which recognizes equal individual civic, religious rights. Democracy lives in society. It doesn't live in politics. That's the word. So you can see the connection, the connection between political democracy, election, fundamental right, and everything, equal fundamental right, and the social relation and the social rights he is bringing out. And that was what social democracy he was talking about. That there has to be unity of common purpose and desire for welfare, loyalty to public aid, and mutuality of sympathy and cooperating for public good. He's emphasizing that. And then the moment you go to the failure of the democracy and limitations of the democracy, you can very easily see that caste system doesn't provide a common goal and common purpose. Castes are divided. Purpose of each of the castes is to maximize the benefit of his own caste. There are hardly in caste a common goal. Therefore, he said that the caste is against democracy. Caste is against the concept of nation, universal nation. So you can see that I think it's very, very important that he's talking of social democracy as a precondition for political democracy. In a society, if there are unequal rights, some have more, some have less. For example, untouchable did not have a right to property. They do not have a right to say, they have lack of civil rights, religious right, and cultural right. Very clearly. And therefore, untouchability was banned in Constitution. Untouchability essentially means the denial of equal right. If in society you deny equal civic, religious right, even political right to vote and other things, then the political democracies, which essentially assure you the fundamental right, will not be successful. What is guaranteed in the Constitution is denied by the society, and therefore it is the social inequality will in fact undermine the political democracy, and therefore social equality, equal rights, common purpose, common pain and common sorrow and common emotions. These are the conditions which are necessary for political democracy. Therefore, he said that the political democracy lives in society. It is not disconnected. And there were many of them who were saying no. I think I remember Banerjee saying that. He quoted Annihilation of Caste. He said that if you don't give right to the woman, widow woman, their right and other right, how does it matter for freedom? And Ambedkar was linking freedom, political freedom, with the social freedom. So there were people who were talking like that. Now, second is, of course, the political equality. If there are political inequalities, then the political democracy will not be successful. And what does he mean by that? He has mentioned that. Say, for example, equality in practice of law and administration, equality of treatment in administration, and no discrimination. That you may have a political democracy, representative of the government govern them, executive are there who are representative, but if they discriminate against the minorities on the basis of caste or religion or gender, then in that case, again, you are not giving an equal treatment. Everybody is not equal before law. So he's talking about the equality in the governance. He's talking about constitutional morality. You know better than I do that observance of constitutional morality and ethics in implementation and adherence to the rules and good convention is very important. You cannot disconnect the political democracy and governance from if there are if there is no equality and if there is a discrimination against certain groups, the equality of fundamental right and equality before law will not be successful, which is guaranteed in fundamental right. Then he's taking it too close to the philosophical aspect of it, and that is public consensus, public conscience. That is sense of right and wrong. That is very, very important. There are in volume 5, if you read Untouchable and Untouchability, there are 2 chapters on public consensus, conscience, not consensus, conscience. And he says that Hindu doesn't have public conscience. There is no sense of right or wrong. There is only, they talk only about their own interests. What are the right of high caste? What are the disability of the scheduled caste? And if you appeal to them, they will say that no, as per our religion, this is not allowed. Even today, people will argue. You know, the conference, religious conference, Hardwar, there are priests who are speaking to the television camera and say that we accept only the Sanatani Dharma. Sanatani Dharma essentially means caste system and a particular religious ideology, about which I would not like to talk. But so the conscience is in favor of inequality and justification. So if conscience is not such that it draws distinction between right and wrong and favor right, then there are problems. And that is what happening today. It's difficult to see that how Dr. Ambedkar's prediction have now come true. The last point in politics inequality was this no tyranny of majority by minority. I think on minority, he has given a very sufficient thought, and nobody has given as much thought as Dr. Ambedkar. But Dr. Ambedkar is neglected in academics and even by the legal expert, I'm sorry to say, on that issue. Dr. Ambedkar began to think on the concept of minority right from 1990. The Muslim, the Sikhs, and the Anglo-Indian and Christians were given political reservation through nomination, some representation on the basis of the fact that they were minority based on the population. Now, Dr. Ambedkar, being scheduled caste, untouchable, who were completely invisible, but he wanted to establish them as a minority so that they get the same political reservation and maybe share in the public administration. Well, he changed the definition of minority. He said that minority cannot be defined on the basis of population. Minority should be defined on the basis of discrimination. Whether that particular population group is discriminated or not will decide whether it is a minority or not. And then he said that compared to the Muslim and the Christians and the Anglo-Indian, the discrimination is immense in case of untouchable. Their population is small and they deserve to be minority. So the minority issue, he brought a conceptual clarity on the issue of definition of minority, which was finally accepted in the roundtable conferences. And they got political reservation along with the Muslims and the others. But I think increasingly when the reservation, political reservation was accepted in 1931 through the Pune Pact, he became increasingly concerned about the issue of minorities. And then, because his proposal were not accepted by Gandhiji, he was forced to accept the present-day reservation as against the separate electorate that he asked for. Even his suggestion to have a qualified joint electorate in the Constituent Assembly, that was rejected by Patel. And so what we have is today reservation, about which he has a tremendous reservation that the present reservation system, joint electorate, will not be able to send the genuine representative of the scheduled caste. Therefore, he tried for separate electorate, he tried for qualified joint electorate, none was accepted. But most important thing that I want to present before you is his thinking on minority vis-a-vis majority in political democracy. And that is communal deadlock and way to solve it. And his recommendation, the conclusion of his are included in the state and minority. That was his recommendation about minorities. What was his thought? I don't have a time, but I think the way the Ambedkar has been sufficiently ignored by the student of your jurisprudence and legal studies and of course sociology. The communal deadlock and way to solve it is a fundamental test which need to be read, and state and minority yet to be read, because it is an very critical analysis of political British type of parliament democracy and improvement that he is suggesting in the British parliamentary system or basis concept of political democracy. In communal deadlock and deadlock is solid, he laid down a hypothesis that the British parliamentary democracy is successful because it has one religion. And there is no heterogeneity, much of heterogeneity, except Catholic and politics. That has created some problem there, but not much. But in India, you have 8 religions. And beside 8 religions, you have caste, you have ethnic group, and other sects. Now, he said that under this immensely diversified system, the British parliamentary democracy will not be successful. And what is that British parliamentary democracy? That you have the political parties and the majority parties which come to the power, rules and govern. And the concept of political democracy, British parliament, British concept of political majority is that the majority comes to the power on the basis of philosophy, ideology, and the policies. That is the basic concept. Now, Dr. Ambedkar argued that this majority, British majority, British concept of majority, which comes on the basis of the ideology of the party and the policy, is a temporary majority. If they don't work properly, they are thrown out. So it's a temporary majority, but it is a secular majority. It is a majority based on ideology and policy. As against this, he theorized that in Indian society, which is characterized by the diversity, the majority will not be secular majority, it will be a communal majority. That is the word he used. By communal majority, it means that the majority which is based on religion, the majority based on caste. Not as much on the basis of ideology and program. Yes, of course, ideology and program are necessary, but underlying base is the religion and the caste. We have not seen religion coming into politics as much as the caste. I will not go to that point for a discussion, but here I'll tell you his concept that the communal majority is permanent as against the secular majority, which is temporary. So see, if the communal majority is decided by the Hindu majority or a high caste majority, it remains permanent. There will be some variation, there will be a fraction, but ultimately the larger base of majority will be caste or religion. Now, how religion has become majoritarian and formed the base for a democracy, I need not say anything to you now. You have to read the book by Christopher Jefferson, Majoritarian Democracy. Now, this was the concept, this was the theorization of Ambedkar. Has anybody written on this? No, nobody has. It was I who, as an economist, tried to understand, absorb it, read it several times, and publish an article in one of the journal, and it is receiving a lot of response. Now, what was his solution? Is a communal majority is not correct. What we require is secular majority. He gave three solutions. Number one, he gave a concept of balanced representation, relative majority. What was his suggestion? I don't have time, so I'll briefly mention it. That reduce the share of the majority, which is the communal majority, increase the share of minority a little bit, so that there is a balance. We are not eroding majority, but some balance. If you give more seats to minority, there will be some balance. You have to go to the document called Communal Deadlock and Way to Solve It Memorandum, and he has given a table where he has reduced the share of Hindus and increased the share of Muslims, scheduled castes, Sikhs, Christians, so that there is some sort of balance. So, in order to reduce the overwhelming dominance of one particular religion, which constitutes 70% of the population, he said their seats should be reduced in the legislation. So, the concept of relative representation, balanced representation. Second, he said that the decision, the government, the executive. So now you have a legislature where will be a mixture of a minority and majority, although majority will remain. But then the communal majority will have a check of minorities because you have increased the seat of the minority. Second is, he's talking about the executive. Because the executive will also be, since the executive is from the legislature, it will also be communal. So he has given an innovative idea to make the executive more secular, more inclusive. And what was the suggestion? Suggestion was that the prime minister should be from the majority, Even if majority is communal, we can't help it. But the Prime Minister should be elected by the entire House, so that at least he is a person or she is a person who is acceptable to both minorities and the majority. He is really a representative of all House. Then secondly, he says that the minister from the minority should be elected by the House from the representative of minorities, so that all minorities, whether from opposition or from in power, will have a faith in those people. So principle of faith and confidence he has brought in. And the third point was decision by unanimity. Now this is a very hard rule, but he discussed there that at least majority prominent decision should be by unanimous vote and not by majority, not by 49 and 51. And he gave the example of the Security Council, that Security Council, if there is a one veto, you can't take a decision. This criteria, this reform, he has not included in the state and minority. The first two he has, balanced representation and the formation of the executive, but unanimity rule he has not mentioned. But nevertheless, you have to understand his thinking that on common issues where there is a huge diversity, there has to be a consensus, and the decision should be taken through consensus. Otherwise, majority can impose the rule on the minority, which is happening today. So this is how he has modified the British form of parliamentary democracy by giving an alternative. We have not given a thought to it. There is a huge injustice to Dr. Ambedkar, I must say. Now, this is what his idea is. Now, let me come to the condition, the condition necessary that he has laid down. But what are his way out? He has suggested way out also. He was a man. I can see only one man who has not only analyzed the problem, identified the causes, and who has given remedies. He is a man of remedies, as a matter of fact, on issue. Others only analyze the problem, highlight the issue, but doesn't give remedies. You know his comment on the objective resolution by Nehru Committee, the first sitting of the Constitutional Assembly, when Nehru resolution was submitted. What should be the objective of the Constitution? And Nehru objective resolution rightly point out that Constitution should be built up in a manner such that it talks of equality, it talks of fraternity, it talks of justice, it talks of freedom. And the Ambedkar comment on that resolution of Nehru was that he said, yes, your goal are right, but where are the remedies? How can you have economic equality without having a socialism or socialistic pattern of society? So he was very keen on the remedies. And in fact, state and minority is nothing. It's important because he has given remedies. He has given the concept of what kind of socialism, what kind of constitution he wanted. I'll come to that later. The point that I want to mention is that what is his solution? I think the solution are simple. Because solution emerge out of the causes, the condition necessary for success of political democracy. I will only mention and stop it, and we can take if there are questions. I think the condition that the solution that he suggested is that reduce economic equality. And then he brought in caste and untouchability. How caste is the antithesis of democracy. Because caste deny freedom, caste deny equity. These are the two founding principles of democracy: freedom and equity. And caste system, which is the organization of the Hindus, which is alive even today in modified form, deny equity. It is based on principle of graded inequality, and it denies the freedom to have an equal civil right to the untouchable, and even to the OBC and to the woman. So he said that something must be done to reform caste system, to annihilate caste system. But he not only suggests the way out, but he suggested legal safeguard, law against discrimination, and also that they should get some share, so he brought reservation. I'll come to the solution which he has given in the state and minority at the end. Lack of fraternity. I forgot to tell you that is one of the preconditions that he laid down for the success of the parliamentary democracy. In democracy, the brotherhood and fraternity is a key condition, which is completely absent in the caste system. The analysis of Dr. Ambedkar of the caste system in volume 3, what are the essential features of caste and what are the unique features of caste? I will not go into the other feature. One of the features that he has pointed out, which other have not, that caste system is antisocial. There are antisocial attitude by one caste against the other. And you can see very easily how we are still organized around the caste, how we hate one caste against the other. And so there is an antisocial feeling in behavior as a part of the caste system. And he said there is a lack of fraternity, brotherhood. Your pain is not my pain. Your sorrow is, your happiness is not my happiness. Your happiness made me unhappy. Your unhappiness made me happy. That is the kind of antisocial attitude that we have. So he said fraternity is very important. And there he brought role of Buddhism. He emphatically says that Buddhism is supportive of political democracy. Then, of course, the step that he asked for the economic equality, that you should have economic equality in order to make the political democracy a success. I think with this point, I should be able to end it. Now, as I share with you, that his commitment to state socialism, not communism, state socialism or socialism, democratic socialism was ideological, not a strategy. So if you read State and Minorities, the annexure where he proposed, of course, parliamentary democracy in State and Minority. He proposed state socialism, constitutional state socialism, and he, of course, proposed a social system which respect equal right. Now, why did he propose state socialism? There you find, if you read the annexure in the state and minority, you can see his ideological commitment. His argument is that the private economy based on private ownership of means of production has a tremendous potential for creating inequalities in the means of production. And therefore, he said that the inequality being the inherent part of the private economy based on private ownership, he went a step ahead. He related the inequality in the private economy to fundamental rights, the connection between the economy and the parliament democracy. And he says that because of inequality, those who are unemployed, those who are poor, are forced to relinquish some of the fundamental rights which are guaranteed by the constitution, by the political democracy, because that is one of the important features of political democracy. So you give a fundamental rights, but if you have an economy, private economy with huge inequality, those who suffered from poverty, those who are unemployed will be required to relinquish their fundamental. They won't be able to enjoy those fundamental rights which are guaranteed by the political democracy. Third proposition. Therefore, he said that we need an economy which will bring economic equality, and that economic equality will enable the people to enjoy fundamental rights, which is the ultimate goal of parliamentary democracy. And he respected freedom and equality very much. And therefore, he says that in some sort of socialism, some sort of state ownership of means of production will bring equality, and that will ensure political democracy. That will ensure that everybody has equal political right. Now, therefore, he suggested nationalization of land and distribution of land through nationalization, key and basic industry under the government, education, insurance, and health under the government. That was the only limited socialist concept of socialism he has proposed. But at the same time, he said that it should be brought through democratic means, not through a totalitarian government or through violence, the way we did it in Russia. He said, no, through democratic method. Now, that all line of thinking he dropped from Germany. This democratic socialism originated in Germany. I don't think it has originated in that detail from the Fabian socialism. No, the friend of Karl Marx brought the democratic socialism. That yes, socialism is necessary, but at the same time through democratic means. Then later development was also state socialism. That we should not look at the state as an enemy of the poor, but state at time can become a neutral, and state has a responsibility to work for all. So state socialism was brought. So he took that German concept of state socialism with a state ownership of some of the means of production, and combine it with parliamentary democracy. Now here is the contribution of Dr. Ambedkar in jurisprudence, constitutional jurisprudence. That you have there are people who talk about parliamentary democracy. There are people who talk about socialism and democratic socialism. But they have not suggested how do you combine this to a constitutional mechanism. Ambedkar is the only person who says that make state socialism a part of the constitution, make it a constitutional law, and make it part of constitution unamendable by any government in the future, which was very idealistic situation of Dr. Ambedkar. Because every time each government comes, the government will change the economic system. But that was his idea, that make a democratic socialism, state socialism, a constitutional state socialism, let parliamentary democracy work, but the economy will remain fixed, which is a socialistic economy. And he said that we have to learn from our experience in developing country and not borrow the same traditional model of British. These are word of his. I am not quoting it for a lack of time. So this is his contribution. You can see how Ambedkar has been neglected. People talk about state socialism, but they have not studied Ambedkar and his analysis and his justification and the improvement that he has made over the concept of concept of parliamentary democracy of British time, and what improvement should be made. Because he suggested democratic socialism in the state and minority, and that memorandum was given to Kripalani. Kripalani was surprised and took it to Radhakrishna, the president of the Constituent Assembly, Rajendra Prasad, and to Nehru and to Patel. He said, no, tell Dr. Ambedkar that we can define only political structure. We cannot define economic structure the way he has proposed. We will have the private economy as our economic structure. Let the legislature decide it. And Ambedkar was against that. He said legislature has never taken a drastic decisions as far as the economy are concerned. We had a land reform, it is not a failure. He mentioned that. Because it is the private economic interests of the people who represent the government. They take the decisions. Therefore, he wanted to make it a part of the constitution. Friend, I will end by just reflecting on his ultimate solution in the state and minority. There are other ways he has said that avoid non-violence, violent method, the bhakti puja, respecting the leader as a hero, as a god, which is the rule of the day today. And he warned about it, and we know that his counterproductive effect. And the final solution that he has given, which is his view, is that he said that the problems are twofold: economic exploitation and social discrimination. Against the economic discrimination, he said that we need a parliamentary democracy is very important. Freedom is very important. But freedom being related to the economic structure, we should have an economic system which is socialistic, so that socialistic economy will ensure fundamental enjoyment of fundamental right. Remember, I am addressing you and I am underlining. He is bringing, Gail Ombet is saying that he is bringing democratic socialism. He is saying not partly because he believes in democratic socialism, but he is bringing democratic socialism to ensure that people enjoy fundamental rights. It is for the purpose of the parliamentary democracy that he is arguing for a state socialism, which is not a full correct argument. Partly it is correct, but I think socialism is also bringing for economic equality and removal of poverty. But I think he valued democracy, he valued freedom and fundamental right. So he is suggesting that state socialism with parliamentary democracy will ensure political rights, fundamental right, as well as economic right. And that is what then he suggested constitutional state socialism. But that state socialism by itself, and even political democracy by itself, there is no guarantee, given our structure, social structure based on caste system, and given the tremendous discrimination, that giving fundamental right, making economic equality operational, those suffered from the discrimination will be able to enjoy equal economic and political right and social right. Therefore, he suggested a second, and that is safeguard against discrimination to scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and now extended to OBC, women, and even the economically backward caste. Now we have a reservation. Everybody should owe to Dr. Ambedkar that he brought the concept of reservation. He brought the concept of legal safeguard. He brought the concept of fair representation to reservation policy. So, a safeguard against discrimination, he suggested three things: reservation in politics, legislature, and state provinces, where he wanted separate electorate, which he did not get it. He wanted qualified joint electorate, he did not get it. Finally, what we have is the political reservation. Then he suggested reservation in public services, both public and private, education, health, and insurance. This is the dual strategy that he has given for the survival of the political democracy, for making democracy more strong. I think these are some of my understanding. You people are not only from constitution and legal studies, but whatever I have read, I think this is what I understand of Dr. Ambedkar. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much, Anurag. Thank you very much, Mr. Registrar, for inviting me and allowing me to share my view.
Thank you, Professor Thorat, for that in-depth lecture. Since we are short in time, so I'll now request Professor Upasana Mahanta to share her concluding remarks on today's event.
Thank you, Anurag. And it is absolutely not an easy task to give the concluding remarks after such a fascinating, truly insightful and informative talk. Professor Thorat, thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure and an honor to be listening to you. And thank you for bringing out actually a vast array of observations from Ambedkar's thought on democracy, to his emphasis on the methods, to the conditions required for the success of democracy, to talking about communal majority versus secular majority, and the fact that Ambedkar emphasized that democracy lies in society. There is a vast array of conversation that you have initiated, and thank you very much for that. I want to just perhaps, as concluding observation, pull on two threads from taking off from what you spoke about. And one is that, from your talk, political democracy for Ambedkar was then not so much of an end in itself, but a powerful means to achieve social and economic ideals for society. I think that comes out from what you spoke about. And, Professor Sudarshan, at the beginning of the talk, spoke about, this moment of celebrating Ambedkar's legacy as a moment of reflection. And I think that, and from your talk, that is a key takeaway, where there are competing claims on Ambedkar. The fact that you drew on his original contributions and spoke about his understanding of democracy, where perhaps this idea has come very strongly through where he spoke about democracy as a model of associated living, and where he spoke about democracy to be understood as in terms of social relationships, and that in terms of associated life between the people who form the society. So if we look at this moment of celebrating Ambedkar's legacy as a moment of reflection and a moment of self-reflection as a society, I think this is something that we take away. And I want to say, Ambedkar said, and in one of his final speeches to the Constituent Assembly, is that let us not forget that this independence has thrown on us great responsibilities. By independence, we have lost the excuse of blaming the British for anything going wrong. If thereafter things go wrong, we will have nobody to blame except ourselves. So I think as academicians, as responsible members of the society, that is a moment for us to engage in self-reflection and to look at the ways in which Ambedkar looked at democracy, looked at social order, and sought to free the individual from fetters of ignorance and shame and humiliation, and that his ideology and his philosophy was rooted in this mixture of action and thought. And Professor Thorat, you spoke about Ambedkar as a man of remedies, that he not only identified a problem and analyzed a problem, but he sought remedies to that problem. And I think that is something we must take away and celebrate. And that is the legacy of Ambedkar that we all must root around. So those are my very brief concluding thoughts. I know that we are very short of time. I want to take this moment once again to express my deepest gratitude, Professor Thorat, to you for giving us your valuable time and sharing your thoughts and reflections on this day. And thank you to all the panelists, and thank you for having me as part of this panel. Thank you once again. Over to you, Anurag.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Mahanta. We are coming towards the end of this memorial lecture. I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Thorat for taking out time and sharing so much insights and knowledge about Dr. Ambedkar and his incredible work. So thank you, sir, for gracing us on this.
Yeah, thank you, Anurag. I have not been able to touch nation and nationalism some other time.
Yeah, no problem, sir. And I'm also grateful to the registrar of the university, Patnaik, for supervising and supporting the organizing team in last 10 days and for taking note of each detail to make this event successful. I'm also grateful to and Professor Mahanta for taking out time from their busy schedule and for joining us today. Professor Sudarshan is also a part of next panel, so he is still going to be here. And I also like to thank the staff members, Lavish, Tudeja, Pawan Dhawan, Anju, Manoj, Rahul, Vidyut, Vishnu, for your help and for all your technical help in supporting this event. And lastly, I would like to thank Professor C. Rajkumar, the Vice Chancellor of OPG Global University, who though is not with us today physically and in this event, but has been a guiding force behind this event and all other activities that we do at this university. So I'm grateful to all. And so I would like to end this memory lecture formally here. And as you know that the lecture is being followed by a seminar. So before the seminar begins and my colleague Swapnil takes over, so we'll be taking a break of a few seconds.
Hello and Jai Bhim to everyone. As we have already discussed the parliamentary, aspects of democracy that Ambedkar had given to us, 14th of April, indeed remains a significant date in the history of Indian society. I would like to thank, the administration of OP Jindal Global University for organizing this event. I would also like to thank, and congratulate specifically to Professor Jadumani Mahanan and, Anurag Bhaskar for taking this initiative to celebrate the birth anniversary of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. I think with the inaugural lecture delivered by the eminent economist and Professor Thorat, we have successfully celebrated the first Ambedkar lecture in the history of JGU. The entire world today is celebrating and discussing the contribution of Ambedkar, who gave us the life of dignity. And when I say us, I'm talking about the entire civil society that is enjoying the benefits and privileges that have been bestowed upon it by the struggles that he fought against the brutal system of untouchability, emancipation of Hindu and so-called untouchable women, and most importantly, his work in the preparation of a democratic constitution that the nation celebrates today. If we engage with the life history of Ambedkar, we find that all his struggles were democratic in nature. All, whether it is about, eradication of untouchability, annihilation of caste, giving their rights, due rights to the untouchables. So he never resorted to violence and prevented his people also from accepting any means of violence to claim their rights in Indian society. One of the examples that comes to my mind, there are plenty of examples of his democratic struggle, the struggles that he organized throughout his life. One of the examples of his non-violent and democratic struggles is Mahar Satyagraha in 1927. Everyone, I think, who has read Ambedkar and who has read his democratic struggles is aware about this Mahar Satyagraha that happened in 1927. So the untouchables were not allowed to drink water from public places, and this particular Satyagraha aimed at claiming their right to equality. At the site of that Satyagraha, or at the site of that protest, he declared that this Satyagraha is not merely for taking water from this particular tank. While addressing his followers, he said that you have not taken it earlier, and it doesn't really matter if you don't use it later also, because you are still alive without taking this particular, drinking water from this particular tank. It doesn't really matter whether you take it or not. And similarly, the caste Hindus are not objecting to it because They are afraid that water will vanish or it will pollute if you touch it. That is also not the case. They are objecting because they think we are not equal to them. He says that they are objecting because they think that we are not equal to them, and we have to establish to this satyagraha, this very satyagraha, that we are human beings like them, and we are equal to them, and we have every right to be treated equally. So he also wants his followers, the followers that were there during that particular struggle or that protest that was happening, that don't be under the impression that we have come here to drink water from Chowdar Lake. This is our freedom struggle to establish social equality in the country. So it can be, one of the aspects of his belief in social democracy that he was, trying to develop for his, next generation. Uh, Similarly, Ambedkar was, and I think Professor Thorat has already mentioned about this, and Ambedkar was a staunch supporter of parliamentary democracy, and it is reflected in his writings and speeches that he delivered at various occasions. For him, there are two important pillars of parliamentary system of government. First, an opposition, and second, free and fair elections. He argues that a functional opposition is required for the success of parliamentary democracy because opposition is the key to a free political life, and no democracy can do without it. And then he talks about free and fair elections, how free and fair elections is the other pillar on which parliamentary democracy rests. So free and fair elections are necessary for the transfer of power from one section of the society to the other in a peaceful manner and without any bloodshed. So here again, he is bringing his aspect of creating a non-violent democracy. So there are plenty of aspects of Ambedkarism and Ambedkar's ideas that can be celebrated, discussed, and engaged with in the context of democracy on this particular discussion. And those concepts and those ideas also need further scholarly engagement. And it is for that very purpose we have three distinguished scholars for this proposed panel who are going to share their thoughts and arguments with all of us. We have Professor R. Sudarshan, who is the Dean of Jindal School of Government and Public Policy at OP Jindal Global University. Then we have Professor Shivani Kapoor, who is also with Center for Writing Study, and she teaches various courses. She is also a political scientist. Then we have Ms. Sunaina Arya, who is a senior research fellow and soon to be doctor, I think, because she was about to complete her PhD. She is with Center for Philosophy at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. So with this, I would like to invite Professor R. Sudarshan to share his views and critical, analysis of Ambedkar's thoughts on democracy and yes, constitutional democracy.
Thank you very much.
Over to you, Professor Sudarshan. Yes.
Thank you very much. We are half hour over time, and so I'm mindful of that. And so initially you allotted 10 minutes, I think, for each panelist with some time for discussion. But since we are running short of time, and I've already had an opportunity to say a few words on this occasion, I'll be very brief. What I wish to focus on, and if students are listening, we generally are now habituated as teachers to give them readings. And I would commend to all the students in the university that they should read Akash Singh Rathore on Ambedkar's preamble as actually the author of a very glorious preamble that we have to our Constitution. I think that's a very important lesson in not only the way Ambedkar thought, but also how he worked, taking along colleagues in the drafting committee, and also then the entire Constituent Assembly to agree on some very critical features of the preamble. And I wanted to emphasize, and this point was made in the previous session, where Ambedkar's view of democracy is a form of associational living of people. And so fraternity is a value that where in the lived experience of people, they treat each other equally and treat each other with dignity and respect. So that's what it entails. But the interesting thing about it is that even if you read Rathor's book on the preamble, you'd notice that Dr. Ambedkar was very insistent and responsible for the words that follow fraternity. Um, it, the words, I think, are about assuring the dignity of the individual and then the unity of the nation. So earlier, in an earlier form, the unity of the nation was placed first, and the dignity of the individual came later. And Ambedkar managed to switch that around, and that's a very important change that he made, because that again emphasizes his belief that the foundation of liberty and equality really requires a social base of fraternity in which the dignity of the individual is assured. Because if you didn't do that, and if you didn't treat all individuals with equal dignity, then you really wouldn't have a unity of the nation. The unity of a nation will derive. So if you have a divided nation, a polarized nation, as we are now, it's a consequence of not emphasizing equal dignity of all persons. So that book is a very important lesson in the way Dr. Ambedkar reflected upon issues, his philosophy. So I commend that as essential reading for all students in the General Global University. The other point I wish to make, and then I won't say more than that, is about Dr. Ambedkar's emphasis on constitutional morality. So when I was working on, how the Supreme Court was dealing with legislation that had to do with the economy, since I'm primarily trained as an economist, I'm not a lawyer, I got interested in constitutional law. I came across a somewhat startling discovery that in one of the Zamindari abolition cases that came before the Supreme Court after the Bihar Patna High Court had struck down the Bihar land reform laws, Chief Justice of the court was Patanjali Shastri, and Mahajan and others, Das. Dr. Ambedkar appeared for a Zamindar. And this kind of puzzled me. How can this champion of the underdog, who played such a major role in the Constitution, the framing of the Constitution, and also had moved, in a way, the First Amendment to the Constitution, the 51, and he moved the amendment and then resigned. And it's very important as to why he resigned. And you see, in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar refers to Grote and emphasizes the importance of constitutional morality when he made the point that the Constitution may be superb and very well drafted, but if the people working the Constitution didn't have constitutional morality and they were unfit for purpose of leadership and governance, the Constitution would fail. So he emphasized constitutional morality already in the Assembly. Then he is very committed to reform of the Hindu code, because that's one step towards making India more egalitarian than it is. It's a casteist society. So he worked very hard on drafting the Hindu code and removing various aberrations that were there in the conventional personal law of the Hindus till that time, including women's rights and also inheritance and many aspects of the Hindu law. And the general consensus was that since it's a parliament which has a majority from that community, you would take that up first. And that's a precursor to reforming personal laws that had aberration and they were not modern, did not accord with equality and liberty of all individuals, would be taken up subsequently. He worked very hard on it. But then meanwhile, when the Zamindari law was struck down, and there was another case involving freedom of speech, Ramesh Thapar, and the magazine called Crossroads in Madras. Nehru was very anxious to amend the constitution and to place restrictions on the right to free speech, and also to safeguard land reform laws, because the right to property was being interpreted in favor of the Zamindars. Dr. Ambedkar, as a good law minister doing his job, worked on the First Amendment, and it went through Parliament. But he wanted the Hindu Code to go through Parliament as well. I mean, this is not a constitutional amendment, this is a statute. On that point, the cabinet and Mr. Nehru held the view that since this was a very sensitive subject, reforming the Hindu law, we'd better wait for the general elections, and the provisional parliament, which was previously the Constituent Assembly, shouldn't be legislating on this. At which point Dr. Ambedkar resigns, and his resignation letter is something that should be made compulsory reading for all people, why he resigns. So he resigns on that issue and then becomes a lawyer. Of course, he's a lawyer eligible to appear in the court. And lo and behold, he appears for the Zamindar, and this puzzled me. And the answer to this really is it's a question of constitutional morality. Here, he was unhappy that a provisional parliament is going to amend the constitution that had just been approved, barely a year ago. And the ink is not even dry, so to speak, on the parchment. And you are now amending it. But that's all right, because your political expediency requires it, and you want it, and you're law minister. But then, when it comes to another very important piece of legislation, you say this requires a proper parliament elected democratically that will have to work on this. Until then, we'll shelve it, right? So this is Ambedkar found this offensive, and he resigned. But he also felt, and he makes it clear, we have to look at Ambedkar, the economist, because the Ambedkar was not enamored by Zamindari abolition. I mean, you are taking away, say, land of Maharaja Sir Kameshwar Singh of Darbhanga, and you're saying you're going to distribute that among his tenants. How do the real tillers of the land benefit from it? A vast majority of the real tillers of the land, who are landless, who worked on the land, are Dalits. They were not going to benefit by Zamindari abolition. And so it seemed to him that this was not such a desperate, and he'd earlier written very informed articles, including one in the Indian Economic Review in the 20s on the land question and on agriculture. And Ambedkar was a great authority on this. So he was not very enamored by this land Zamindari abolition and the haste with which you sought to protect the law, even though it was not going to be really egalitarian and it was not going to benefit people, right? So this, so even though on the surface, it looks like, why should this great person, appear on behalf of a Zamindar as the lawyer in the Supreme Court? The puzzle is resolved only if you appreciate the total commitment that Ambedkar has towards constitutional morality. So, you referred to the Mahar Satyagraha. There was one in March of 1927, another in December. And after that, Dr. Ambedkar decided that the most durable way by which you resolve these issues is through law. I mean, he's a great believer in the rule of law. And it took a fair amount of time before, the legislature in Maharashtra was able to guarantee access to public places to all the citizens. But he believed in that. He didn't believe in violence. And so throughout his life, he was an exemplar of what he himself uh, described as constitutional morality. So this is what I wanted to say, that, there are very few people in political life who have true integrity. By true integrity, I mean a certain wholesomeness of their beliefs and their actions. Are their actions consistent with their beliefs, right? Most of the time, we encounter people in public life who say one thing and do something else, and don't really have conviction in any principles which they expound for the benefit of others, and do not demonstrate that in their own actions. And Dr. Ambedkar did demonstrate that in his own actions, and including the fact, and Dr. Thorat also made the point, that he was charged with a job. He did that job very well. When he was Minister for Irrigation and Water and Electricity in the Viceroy's Council, he did a commendable job doing that. When he was the Law Minister, he did a commendable job doing that, including passing the moving the first constitutional amendment, even though he felt that that should not have been taken up, and that the Hindu Code Bill should have been taken up before trying to tamper with the Constitution. So I'd say, therefore, it's a person to be admired, who should be an exemplar for all of us, that a person of true integrity combines principles, convictions, with the way the person lives his life and makes decisions in his life. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sudarshan. And now I would like to invite Professor Shivani to share her views with all of us. Shivani?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Dr. Dhanraj, for this introduction, and to Dr. Mahanand for marking this very important occasion and allowing all of us to be a part of it. Um, we all know, and this has been discussed, that Dr. Ambedkar is one of the most important thinkers and leaders of our time, and many have said that we would be worse off if he was not there, if he had not done the work that he did. And so, in a sense, I think this is an important occasion for all of us, whichever sort of identity we occupy in today's society. Now, a lot has already been said and covered about Ambedkar and his ideas on constitution and democracy. So I'm going to actually focus on just one sentence, so to say, which he wrote in The Annihilation of Caste. Again, perhaps one of his more important texts, really, as far as the question of caste is concerned. And in The Annihilation of Caste, he writes very strongly. In fact, he asks a question when he says, should we treat people unequally because they are facing unequal circumstances in life? Now, at one level, this is quite a provocative, or one can say even a rhetorical question. It's very simplistic in what it is asking, and in any ethical society, it would be simple to say no. We should treat people equally, or as Ambedkar himself would argue, treat people with the equality of consideration. However, Ambedkar was not writing The Annihilation of Caste, and neither are we discussing this book today in an ethical society or in a society which is based on the principles of fairness or the principles of justice. Ambedkar, as we know, faced deep injustices and discriminations at the social, political, and economic level, and he always continued to speak for those who face these depressions even today. Thus, when Ambedkar speaks of the question of equality, He represents what Gopal Guru has called a position of epistemic privilege. And this is an epistemic privilege over others uh, in due to the fact that the speaker occupies a less powerful position in the society, and thus, Guru argues, has a more encompassing view of social reality because of their disadvantaged position. And so, Ambedkar's question about treating people equally and how do we treat people equally is thus a question, is a strong normative question, which is framed and which is asked from this position of epistemic privilege, really, and which is what makes this question so very important for us today. This is also a question which is located very deeply at the core of our imagination of democracy and the constitution. And, you know, this question becomes even more relevant today as we are discussing this, uh, because we must ask, how does a nation state such as ours, which claims to be a democracy, at least procedurally, grapple with providing substantive equality, and equality in terms of resources, in terms of opportunities, dignity, and aspirations? How does it propose to provide this complex sense of equality to a society which is so steeped in the ethics of hierarchies? Now, caste, of course, is one of the hierarchies which Ambedkar is centrally preoccupied with. And he argues very powerfully that caste does not allow the Hindu society to develop into a nation. It does not allow a spirit of fraternity to develop because it promotes deep mistrust of each other. And we are seeing that in the contemporary times, as Professor Sudarshan also mentioned, we're seeing this phenomena manifest in everyday life, and even in the procedural parts of democracy. So much so that it is not even a complex question like equality, which is plaguing us today. But the fact is that, simple articulation of difference has been used to perpetuate some of the most horrific acts of violence, both physical and structural, on those who do not comply with majoritarian ideas. And so Ambedkar's question about how do we treat people equally, especially when they do not seem to be occupying equal footing in the public, or they don't seem to be agreeing to a common sort of idea or agenda, that question becomes especially relevant for us today. And like has been mentioned, Ambedkar is also a provider of solutions, and he does provide a elaborate systemic articulation of what is to be done about equality. And for him, in one way, the answer lies in this sort of in the trinity of the nation, the civil society, and democracy, and how we conceptualize these three to be working together, is where equality really arises for somebody like Ambedkar. And democracy, and I think this is extremely important for us to remember at the present moment, that democracy, Ambedkar argued, can only work when we think of democracy as a civic virtue, uh, which means that we think of a moral commitment, we think of an ethical commitment to the democratic value in everyday life. We think of humans qua humans, and we think of uh, the place that these substantially equal human beings occupy uh, in our notions of democracy, right? Um, and this sense of democracy for Ambedkar, this ethic of democracy as a civic virtue, as an everyday phenomena, can only be backed by a civil society, which he very aptly calls the conscious keeper of politics. And this civil society, Ambedkar would argue, cannot be formed um, in a scenario of mutual distrust and also mutual disgust of each other, which structures like caste really promote. Um, and because, we are then looking at structures of civil society, which, to borrow from Suryakant Wagmore's formulation, are not so civil anymore, but are based on these mutual distrust and disgust. Um, when this form, or this corrupted form of civil society and democracy, come together to form a nation, that nation is weak and potentially, Ambedkar argues, marginalizes those who are marginalized further, right? Um, and for Ambedkar, the role of the state in such a scenario, and again, this has been talked about before, but I'm just going to reiterate it, that the role of the state in promoting this ethic of democracy, or promoting um, a civil society based on fraternity and respect and equality, the role of the state is central in this. And this has to be a strong state. This has to be a state which is, sort of intervenes in these processes actively, quite unlike the state that we are witnessing today. And this has to be a state which is backed by the regime of rights and reasons. And I'm quoting Ambedkar directly here now. Very importantly, a state backed by a regime of rights and reason. And that alone, he would argue, can foster a certain democratic ethic. Now, what we are seeing today, in fact, is a state which subscribes and actively subscribes to the notions of equality, to the notions of inequality and hierarchy as one of its founding principles. A state which is prioritizing one identity over others. And such a state, in Ambedkar's estimation, can never even attempt to answer the question about equality. And so, what we are facing, as Professor Sudarshan also pointed out, is a potentially fragmented state, which is struggling to maintain, the substantive parts of democracy, which is struggling to maintain the civic parts of democracy. Now, I'll just sort of end this elaboration with returning to the question that we began with, which is the question of, should we treat people facing unequal circumstances unequally? And in asking this question of us, Ambedkar has also, I think, sort of turned the mirror onto us by including the we. Should we treat people facing unequal circumstances unequally? And I think we should consider or discuss a little bit what or who is this we really? Who is it that is making the decision to foster a certain sense of equality? Or who is it that is making the decision to foster a sense of inequality? And I think, Ambedkar has always talked about the existence of a governing class, which for him was the upper castes, was a combine of the Brahmins and the other upper castes. And Ambedkar would argue that as long as power resides with this governing class, which has particularistic interests in mind, uh, substantive democracy cannot really come into existence. Now, we all know and we've read about concepts such as Brahminism versus Brahminical, or the idea of Brahminical patriarchy. And so I think it's safe to expand this idea of the governing class to anyone really, to whichever class or caste or religious identity they belong to. But the governing class could then be thought of as anyone who subscribes to an ideology based in hierarchizing differences, right? And anyone who prioritizes this hierarchizing today functions as an oppressor, right? And so when Ambedkar turns around the mirror to us and say, should we foster equality or should we foster inequality? I think we are all implicated in this question, because this we is a very hugely collective sort of a we. And I'll end with this, but we are also implicated in what happens if we choose to foster inequality, or what happens if we choose to foster equality instead. Ambedkar has very famously talked about the idea of caste being graded inequality, right? Where everyone is graded vis-a-vis, graded vertically, hierarchically vis-a-vis the other, right? And so, at some level, because we are all part of this system of graded inequality, we would be at a disadvantage, relatively speaking, vis a vis someone else in the system at every given stage. And thus, I think it would be, and Ambedkar would probably argue that it would be in our collective and individual interest to build systems of political, economic, and social equality which counter these oppressions, which counter these discriminations, and creates a more just and egalitarian principle of what Ambedkar has called associated living, where democracy really becomes a way of life and doesn't quite remain a procedural idea alone. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shivani. And yes, it is indeed an important question for all of us to think about that how we should be treating people equally. And when we talk about we, I think it also includes various communities and including the marginalized communities that exist, coexist in our society today. So thank you, Shivani, for your time and for joining us for this discussion. Now I would like to call Ms. Sunaina Arya to share her views with all of us. Sunaina?
Yes. Uh, Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. And this was a great, opportunity for me to learn from Professor R. Sudarshan, Professor Thorat, and Professor Shivani. These were really interesting and very important points raised by all of you. And thanks, Professor Bhaskar and Professor Dhanraj, for uh, your efforts here in and Professor Mahanand for bringing all of us together to celebrate Dr. Ambedkar's birth anniversary at JGU. So this is about revisiting Dr. Ambedkar's conception of democracy and constitutionalism. I would like to talk about how Dr. Ambedkar's conception of democracy and constitutionalism is deeply rooted with his experiences and his observation and his learnings about the society, which he had discussed in his which he has really dealt with in his writings. So I would talk about how I focus on the gender issue. So I would discuss that how he had drafted Hindu Code Bill, and Hindu Code Bill is not the time when he has started actually his feminist ideas, expressing his feminist or gender just or gender equality ideas to the public. Because in my research on Ambedkar as a feminist philosopher during my MPhil time, I have found that Dr. Ambedkar's founding of Hindu Code Bill, which is highlighted by Dr. Sudarshan, like the importance of Hindu Code Bill and like how important this part of constitution was, that Dr. Ambedkar had resigned from the assembly, the committee. So I would discuss about how he arrived at it, and my argument is that Dr. Ambedkar's idea of gender justice, which he brought into constitution, is not does not start from the constitution, but because of his understanding. So, and there we can see as his theoretical contribution to the gender justice or a gender just society, and then we can see the pragmatic pragmatic expression of those ideas which he, proposed. I'm a little nervous, so I'm sorry. Yeah, so he had started with, his critique of the ancient text, where he read that, how women were treated in the ancient Indian society as well as in the grand epics. So, like, we see that, how Sita was, when she was kidnapped by the Ravan, and then Ram went there to fight, and then fought uh, fought with the fought the entire war, and then at the end of it, when he comes to Sita, he says to her that I did not take this trouble. I came here to kill Ravan and wash off this dishonor. I did not take this trouble for your sake. So this is from the Ramayana, written by Valmiki, and not the Ramcharitmanas written by Tulsidas. So there, in shlokas 1 to 23 of Yuddha Kanda Sarga, this is the conversation between Rama and Sita, where how Sita is being objectified by her husband, and how she's again demeaned by being told that I have nothing to do with you. I conquered you back, and I am content, for that was my object. I cannot think that Ravan would have failed to enjoy a woman as beautiful as you are. So this is, something which Ambedkar criticized in Ramayana, because uh, Ram is regarded as the ideal man, ideal Hindu man, and then how he treats his partner shows us that this is against the ideas of justice and equality and liberty, and that is why he rejects, like, criticizes the Ramayana. And second, I'd like to point about Krishna's treatment of women. Like, he had how he had tried to demean women and did not ever regard them as equal to men. So he had you know he had got like chief wives, which were rewarded to him for victory in fights, like Kalindi. And his wife Jambavati was offered to him as a penalty, and Satyabhama was offered to him because her father was fearing Krishna in the like to fight with him. And even for killing bulls, he had got Satya. So he not only carries them off, like Lakshmana, he carried her off, uh, and he who was his cousin Shishupala's fiance, Rukmini as well. And then he also suggests Mitrabinda as well. Yeah, and he also suggests Arjuna to carry Shubhadra, who's Krishna's half sister, Balrama's sister, to carry her away from the Swayamvar. And the words are like a brave Kshatriya without depending on the chances of Swayamvar. So there is some irony in this, like the bravery of Kshatriya is not lying in fighting and depend on the chances of Swayamvara, but rather carrying a woman away from her Swayamvara. So, well, the idea of women for Krishna, that is this thing which we see in Mahabharata. It's in Mahabharata itself. And so Ambedkar comments that Krishna does not take the pain of arguing and acts on his own whims, and criticizes Mahabharata from a feminist perspective, because we see that women have been dehumanized in Mahabharata, and on the basis of ethics, he disregards the Mahabharata as a source of morality. So, and then he also engages with Manusmriti before he actually went on burning it, because he just could not accept the kind of things were written for women in Manu Smriti. So Manusmriti 11, 67, this shloka means killing a woman is a mere upapattaka, that is a minor offense. And Manusmriti 9:11 says that women have no knowledge of religion because they have no right to know the Vedas. So women do not have the knowledge of religion, and at the same time they do not have the right to know the Vedas, because women are regarded as, unclean. So women cannot utter the Veda mantras because they are unclean as untruth is. So Ambedkar reads it from a feminist lens and regards this view as an insult and an injury to the women of India. So Ambedkar shows that Manu's argument is circular because, firstly, a woman is prohibited to realize her spiritual potential. I'm quoting, to prohibited to realize her spiritual potentiality, and then she is declared to be barren of spiritual potentiality. So we see like how these arguments against women, these acts against women, and the entire epic, like, and the basic belief systems, how they are against women, and how treating women as property, and treating and carrying women away like some object, or objectifying women, or how they are like, there is no idea of a woman's consent, whether she wants to go with somebody, or whether it was her mistake that or not when Ravan kidnapped her. So all of that, made Ambedkar, I believe, from my research, I have shown that these observations, these criticisms, and these epics writings have made Ambedkar uh, you know provide alternatives to the prevailing social order, and the prevailing social order was based on patriarchal norms. So obviously even today we know that not all women are equal, and not that all women have gained the rights as equal to men, but we know that Ambedkar has contributed to the women's empowerment, and has supported their upliftment, and provided them opportunities to speak for their rights, and also attain their rights with the legal mechanism. So so Ambedkar says, uh, I quote, let each girl who marries stand up to her husband, claim to be her husband's friend and equal, and refuse to be his slave. This is from Ambedkar's work, 2003 work, page number 283, where he has also said that, unity is meaningless without the accompaniment of women. Education is fruitless without educated women, and agitation is incomplete without the strength of women. So the overall idea of Ambedkar, objective of Ambedkar, was to have a thriving and progressing society, and he has observed and seen that patriarchy is not letting this goal to of a progressive India to be realized, and that is why he is proposing laws, and in the constitution and Hindu code bill itself, where women get the opportunity to participate and participate in the society, like social affairs and political affairs, and through the participation and of also through the opportunity of learning education, they can become capable of contributing to the growth of India as a nation. So, introducing the maternity bill, Ambedkar emphasizes that it is in the interest of the nation that the mother ought to get a certain amount of rest in prenatal period. So this shows that his vision for the future of the country. So maternity bill is not for the women herself, like not a favor to the women. So Ambedkar's feminist ideas are not to favor women, but to help women fight patriarchy, get opportunities, to be able to learn, get skills, to be able to contribute to the progress of the society. So the proposal of feminist laws like Marriage Act, Maternity Act, Divorce and Maintenance Act, Adoption Act, and on his opposition on its opposition in Constituent Assembly, resigning from the position of law minister, shows Ambedkar's strong commitment to avail equality to each and every woman in India, irrespective of caste, class, region, religion, and other identities. So, Dr. Ambedkar has championed the freedom from slavery and empowerment of women. And so we can say that, before the Hindu Code Bill and before the, constitution supporting women, we could see that, in like women were regarded as property, and with Hindu Succession Act we can see that they could get property, so they became women with property and not merely as property. And earlier they were treated as slaves to their husbands, and with the new ideas, the rights and equality availed to women, they could be standing as an equal, and with their husbands stand as their friends. And earlier they had no right to education. Remember, like they were told that you cannot read Vedas because you are impure and unclean. But now Ambedkar has provided them opportunity, so that they don't only have the right to education but also have the right to educate others. So earlier we can see, like from Mahabharata, that they were demeaned and repudiated by their husbands, and also in Ramayana, of course. But now they can also choose to leave their husbands for their inhumane behavior. And like when Sita was in Vanvas and she was pregnant, and still she was sent for Vanvas. So her health, like with the example of Sita, we see that how women's health issues were grossly ignored. So with Maternity Act, their health is taken into proper consideration, even in the workplace. So Sharmila Rege, I quote Sharmila Rege, champion of Ambedkar's feminism, argues that Hindu Code Bill advances a woman to be recognized as an equal and free individual citizen as men, rather than less than a member of a family, or something to be gained or protected, that is honor. So I would like to submit that Dr. Ambedkar's efforts into empowering women, into bringing the laws and the acts to uplift women, was which that did not just come for seeing that women are victims of patriarchy and we should help them and support them, which a patriarchal society would like to believe. But Ambedkar saw that how women as individuals did not have the opportunity to be able to contribute. So like how half of the
Yes,
how
please
half
wind it up.
population how half of the population of the entire India is not being able to contribute to the progress of India. That is why he had done these. So I'd like to thanks again to all of you for your patience hearing, and Professor Thorat, Dr. Sudarshan, and Professor Bhaskar, and Dhanraj, and Mahanan, and Dr. Kapoor as well, for this really interesting and very excellent event today. Thank you so much. Jai Bhim, everyone.
Thank you, Sunaina. Unfortunately, we did not have time, and we already started the session late. And due to that reason, we could not give more time to our panelists. But indeed, it was a pleasure to listening to all the panelists today, including yourself. And thank you very much for focusing on Ambedkar's contribution, and most importantly, from the feminist lenses that you have developed over the period of time. And I would also like to thank Professor R. Sudarshan for focusing on Ambedkar as an economist, and talking about various aspects of his economic democracy that he was trying to develop. I would also like to apologize, Professor Sudarshan. There was a kind of miscommunication in the beginning, and we were also getting a couple of messages from the participants, so there was that miscommunication. So I hope you can understand that. Thank you, Professor Sudarshan, for blessing us with your presence in the panel, and of course, Professor Shivani Kapoor, for asking this question, that how do we treat people equally, and that question was for all of us. And she also rightly mentioned that how Ambedkar was engaging with this category of caste, and he mentioned that caste does not allow the Hindu society to develop into a nation. And this is the kind of question, I think it is a kind of very democratic question that we should be asking to ourselves, that whether annihilation of caste should be the project of one particular community or the entire civil society. So thank you very much, all of you. Thank you, Professor Sudarshan, Shivani Kapoor, and Sunaina Arya, for blessing us with your presence. Over to you, Anurag.
Thank you, Swapnil. I think the technical team can stop the live streaming for a few seconds before we move on to the next session.
Yes, Vishnu, can we stop the online streaming of this session? I think it has stopped, Anurag. Or Mute yourself for 2 seconds. It is streaming online.
इनका लाइव स्ट्रीमिंग चल रहा है, तो जूम पे है, बट आई थिंक इनका अपना चैनल है यूनिवर्सिटी का, हाँ वहाँ पे चल रहा है।
Jadu, I think you should start now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Vidyut, is it fine? Is it okay? Shall
Yes,
I start?
it is streaming online now. Yes.
Because I didn't see the green button. That's why. Anyway. So it is indeed, it is a great pleasure to celebrate Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Jayanti 2022 at JGU in a virtual mode, and I really thank you everybody for participating this very historical moment in the university. So in the first session, Professor Thorat gave a memorial lecture, and he again brought out the significance of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar on the conception of democracy, and how he also pointed towards that how democracy is in crisis in a different sense of facing this majoritarian political democracy. So and he also brought out many remedies that was given by Dr. Ambedkar. So there are so much to talk on this. And in the first session of this seminar, so Professor Sudarsanam again touched upon the contribution of Dr. Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly debates, and specifically his contribution towards economic democracy. So then Shivani Kapoor talked about the ethical conception of democracy, that how a person should be treated and would be treated in a democracy. So then Sunena interestingly brings the concept of gender justice in Ambedkar political philosophy, and he also calls somewhere Ambedkar as a feminist philosopher. So very interesting takeaway from the first session. Then in the second session, in the seminar, we have three distinguished scholars who have contributed to the idea of public democracy in a different way. So, and when we think about the idea of revisiting Dr. Ambedkar conception of democracy and constitutionalism, it often reminds us the contemporary dispensation that we all are facing in a different way, but also it goes beyond what I call sometimes that how Dr. Ambedkar conception of democracy and constitutionalism in a way give us a framework to go back to the very foundational idea of it. And one can now read, or when we talk revisiting of democracy and constitutionalism, essentially it also refers to the global scenario, not necessarily the Indian context, that how Ambedkar can be studied, can be read, can be revisit in a different way while talking about global politics and global dispensation in a different way. So in this context, I could be reminded of Hannah Arendt and many others who actually talk about this. And to him, to Dr. Ambedkar, the idea of constitutionalism is not only relevant to the political, the existential condition, but also in a deeper way, make us to rethink about the moral and ethical dimension of democratic life. So Dr. Ambedkar interestingly brings the distinction between democratic and democracy. So, and India yet to be a democratic nation and society that we all are confronting every day. And the idea of constitutionalism in a way brings out to again think about how to protect democracy, how to protect constitution, and the protect dignity of a human being in a democratic framework. So in this context, it is also, he also make us to aware that how in a democracy, political democracy, how democracy produce majoritarian democracy, and that becomes a tyranny of majority, and therefore his idea of democracy and constitutionalism, make us to rethink and reread and make it its social and political relevance today. So in this context, we have three very distinguished scholars. So we'll go by the sequence first. Let me, introduce them. Professor Sukumar Muralidharan is at Jindal Law School of Journalism and Communication, JGU. He has been writing and speaking on different kind of issue concerning to democracy and constitutionalism. Then Professor Dr. Samina Dalwai is at Jindal Global Law School at Jindal Global University. She has been also writing many things on the issue of gender, caste, sexuality, and so on. So her editorials generally comes in many national newspapers. Then at the end, Professor Dr. Y.S. Alone is from GNU, from School of Art and Aesthetics. He has been one of the public figure, public intellectual for last 1 decade, writing on various issues, generally on the issue of art and aesthetics. And he brings out that how the idea of art and aesthetics in a different way, perpetuate the idea of Brahminical. And when he brings out the Ambedkarite idea of art and aesthetics, actually also talks about the idea of ethic, idea of democracy, and how it necessarily contribute to the idea of a democratic society. So this much I would say about our distinguished scholar today. So let me first invite Professor Sukumar to start the program. So we'll have only 15 minutes each, so that I need not to again, disturb you, so that you prepare according to that. So over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much. I was actually prepared for 10 minutes, but you've been very generous. Thank you, Jadumani, and greetings to all the participants. And it's been a great afternoon listening to Professor Thorat. Was very enlightening, and he, of course, was extremely comprehensive in the way he approached this question. And there's not very much that I can add to that. I can just possibly cross the T's and dot the I's. But speaking from the vantage point of today, I think it's imperative that we consider the warnings that Dr. Ambedkar sounded. Now, he was the chief architect of the Constitution, but of course, he didn't make a secret of his lack of full sense of satisfaction over what came out of the Constituent Assembly deliberations, and he gave expression to that sense of dissatisfaction in his valedictory address on 26th of November 1949, the day the Constituent Assembly adopted the Republican Constitution by unanimous acclaim and rose, right? And kind of disregarding the convention that you don't spoil an auspicious occasion with critical remarks. He came out and said that we have several kind of worries about how we're going to implement this constitution. That no matter how good the people are, no matter how good the constitution is, if the people are not up to the values enshrined in it, then we'll not make a success of it, and vice versa. Even if we have a very poor constitution, if we have good intentions, then we can make a success of it. So those kind of sentiments, and also, of course, his most famous quote, which has resonated through the ages, is the point he makes about the contradiction that India was embarking upon, the life of contradictions between political democracy, because we have in the world of politics, one man, one vote. So you have formal equality of some sort. But we are living in a society and an economic order of gross inequalities, right? So there is a contradiction between the formal equality of the constitution and the substantive inequality of our society and our economic structure. So he was kind of sounding a warning about how one would cope with the other, and that there is a possibility that one will overwhelm and completely subvert the objectives of the other. And of course, in later years, he came to focus more particularly upon how Indian society still remained segmented, highly segmented in terms of caste and community, and how the true sense of democracy was yet to kind of gain any kind of traction in the perceptions of the general public. And curiously, from a very different perspective, Prime Minister Pandit Nehru also was worrying about the same thing. Like when he wrote to his regular correspondent, the chief ministers, in one of them in 1954-55, he articulated his worries that secularism is very important. Secularism means, and he of course had a broad understanding. He said secularism means a regime of absolute equality, but a caste-ridden society can never be secular, properly secular, and that there is a risk that the institutions of caste will invade the systems, the institutions of the state, and kind of petrify, right? So will paralyze them. So that was a worry that he had, and of course, Ambedkar by then was beginning to think very critically about the constitution, and in the context of all the raging debate that was going on then about linguistic reorganization of states and so on, came up with certain formulations which kind of seem to be prescient in many ways, because they anticipate so much of what we have seen since then. And of course, he was in support of the linguistic reorganization of states because he thought that there is a sense of fellow feeling that is necessary for political cohesion. But then he also said that a sense of fellow feeling is a two-edged sword, because it comes along with a sense of anti-fellow feeling to the other, so to speak, right? And then he also spoke about how each linguistic region in India is dominated by one particular kind of caste, and typically this begins with land ownership. It is rooted in land ownership, but then it's translated into various other things, and there is a very strong possibility that this dominant caste will, as he put it, I think, run away with the keys to our democracy. It will impose its kind of dominance through the system of democracy, through the formal system of the universal franchise. Interestingly, this is at roughly the same time that the sociologist M.N. Srinivas is coming up with his formulation about dominant castes and how that whole system, that whole social structure works itself out through the electoral system, through the Republican Constitution, to cement a form of dominance, right? Through vote banks and other such things. So Ambedkar is speaking about the same thing, but from a very, very politically engaged perspective, not from a detached kind of academic perspective that M.N. Srinivas said, but from a very, very engaged political perspective. And this, of course, refers back to his earlier work. And his earlier work, of course, we should not forget. I mean, we hesitate a bit. We turn our faces away from the manner in which he was a consistent opponent of Gandhiji, and how he virtually saw no good coming out of the kind of paternalistic approach that Gandhiji adopted towards the institution of caste. And he kept up that polemical kind of engagement with Gandhism right up to independence. And then, of course, after Gandhi's assassination, he may have backed away from that level of polemic. But I don't think he ever accepted the kind of dispensation that was crafted out of the Gandhian approach towards remedial of caste inequities. For instance, he thought that assured representation through quotas for minorities was a hard-won victory, and that was the reason that he opposed proportional representation. He believed that proportional representation gives minorities a voice and choice of elected representatives, but does not give them assured representation. Right. So quotas had been a hard-won victory, going right back to the Pune Pact and his insistence on the Roundtable Conference on treating the untouchables as a separate political entity, and this was consolidated over time and became part of the formal structure of governance in the Constituent Assembly debates and so on. So for that reason, he thought that proportional representation would not be a good idea. But then, others made the point that proportional representation can lead to the system that we're adopting, the single member constituency, simple plurality constituency, can lead to the consolidation of dominant caste groups as kind of as eternal ruling castes in particular states. So over time, and I think towards the last years of his life, 1953, 54, 55, he came around to re-examining that system, the Westminster parliamentary system that had been enshrined in the Constitution, and he found that it needed to be qualified in many ways. And of course, one of the means through which he proposed that it could be modified was by creating what he called a non legislative executive. That the executive has a separate existence from the legislature, because the legislature will reflect all the kinds of sectional interests of various communities, and the executive should not be allowed to reflect those same kind of sectional interests. So what does that mean? He's talking about how the executive should have assured representation from every significant section of society, and that the majority's nominees should be subject to a minority veto. The majority nominee should be subject to a minority veto, but the minority nominees not so. The minorities will have their own, can nominate their own representatives at their own discretion. Now, this sounds kind of implausible. How can you implement such a system? It's a very unwieldy system, and does not in any way assure us of any kind of a coherent or cohesive system of governance. But it was a work in progress, and the point of his work after he quit the cabinet and after he moved, as he was moving more and more closely towards his final act of cultural rebellion, the October 1956 renunciation of Hinduism and the embrace of Buddhism as a cult of egalitarianism. As he was going through that transition, he was constantly rethinking the whole system of politics that he is credited with having brought into existence. Although he was not, very, very proud of that particular achievement. I mean, there are several self-deprecatory remarks that he's made about his role in drafting the Constitution, and on many of its most vital parts, as for instance on the fundamental rights part. I think Professor Thorat had referred to this too. Fundamental rights chapter is one respect in which the Indian Constitution is a big advance over the Government of India Act 1935. 1935 Government of India Act had many of these, the administrative parts of the Constitution, which we later adapted. In fact, Ambedkar once said so also, that it's just a kind of a rehash of that. But the fundamental rights chapter is really where it is at. And of course, the directive principles. And directive principles, he said that, this is about striving, and you cannot use a lack of resources as an alibi for not seeking the objectives outlined here. On the fundamental rights, he said that these are principles that have been known for 150 years or more. I mean, they were part of the American Declaration of Independence. They were part of the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. So rather than reaffirm these, let's think about why we have been unable to actually make these practical reality. And that will bring us towards some means, some administrative means through which we can kind of, make a regime of equality a reality for so many millions who are denied that status. So I think all of this goes back to earlier debates and the whole fundamentals of how India is imagined as a nation, as an independent nation. And of course, there were various ways in which India was imagined, beginning with 1905, the Swadeshi movement, and the Hindu nationalists like Tilak and so on, and then of course Gandhi and Tagore and their kind of constant debates over how we can constitute India as a nation, and that whole skepticism about the nation. What is a nation? There's no such concept in any language, and any Indian language, and so on. And Gandhi's kind of insistence that civil society is the foundation, and his effort to construct. I think his effort to construct a kind of coherent political entity out of that, out of the building blocks of the local community, and of course Ambedkar's scathing criticism of this, saying that what kind of romanticism is this? We all know what the village republic is. It is not what Gandhi imagines it to be. It's a nest bed of discrimination and prejudice, and we need to have a strong system of laws that sets right the inequities in society, rather than continue to romanticize this. So that effort, of course, went on, and then very early death, of course, deprived us of much of what could have been, what might have been possible. But I think it's very important that today the rediscovery is happening. It's accelerating. People are realizing that his work contains multitudes, and there is so much in his work that we can look at today and immensely profit from, and all of them refer to dilemmas that we face today. And it has been a long journey, because I was just mentioning this in all my classes recently, as recently as 1978-79, when the Maharashtra state government, it was of course a politically motivated thing, but nevertheless it was a worthwhile thing to rename Marathwada University after Dr. Ambedkar. There were riots in the streets, and the Dalits had to come out in opposition and so on, but there was a kind of stiff opposition from casteist groupings on the other side, and finally the move was rescinded. Later on, it was done in a more kind of peaceful environment, but that sort of thing is never going to happen again, right? I mean, now we recognize him as probably one of the seminal thinkers of our independence movement, and a person who still has much to offer as we go forward, grappling with the crisis of our republic today. And I think very few would really question that proposition, that today we do really face the crisis of Republican values, right? That's very obvious. So thank you so much, everybody, for the patient hearing. I hope I've not overstepped my time. So, Jadumani, thanks to you.
Thank you, Professor, for this very interesting point. Very interesting, bringing out the historical relevance of Dr. Ambedkar and how some time back, maybe 20 years back, how he was not so much in the public domain, but his ideas remain so relevant to the public today. So thank you very much for bringing this important questions. So now I would like to request Professor Samina Dalwai to take the speak.
Hi, Jadu. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Yes. Yes.
Can Professor Alone go before me? Because I think I have a technical problem here.
We can hear you. Why? What is the technical problem? We can hear you. We can see you. What's the matter?
Hello. Is it okay, Professor Samina? Can you speak? Then we can go to last speaker. Hello, Professor Samina Dalwai. Are you here? Is there any problem? Okay, then I think, hello. Okay, then I may request Professor Y.S. Elene to deliver his thought on the question. So then at the end, Professor Samina will be speaking.
Thank you, Dr. Jadumani. Thanks the entire team of Jindal Global University for inviting me. Well, let me confess that I'm not an expert on constitution as such, but the ways in which the political scientists, the legal luminaries, and other people would like to enter or see it. But I see, with my very limited knowledge and information, I would like to put certain points. And certainly they are related with constitution, they are related with Dr. Ambedkar, they are related with the general sense of the public sphere in India. And a number of issues have been brought, and it's very interesting to observe. Since I've given only 15 minutes, so I'll stick to those 15 minutes only. There are a couple of things which are very necessary to interrogate, and that interrogation is with regarding to the Hindu Code Bill, because one also has to see who were the member of parliaments who came forward in support of the Hindu Code Bill. And as we know that majority of the people who were there in the parliament, as a member of parliament, as a representative of the people and respective political parties, went
against the Hindu Code Bill, and under the pretext of not putting it for the vote, or under the pretext of getting a re-election, the Prime Minister of that time refused to take it forward, and that is a history. Now, having said that, what one really needs to investigate is that the successive governments and the political parties who were in power have always eulogized the leaders and inscribed them in the public memory as a great nationalist. All those people, the member of parliaments who were there in opposition to Hindu Code Bill, have been eulogized subsequently and are re-inscribed in public personas. And this is how the public sphere gets constructed against the women. They are all anti-women figures. So the anti-women figures are constantly inscribed in the public life. That is one thing. The second important thing which one has to also see, legally speaking, is that irrespective of the fact that there is a freedom of expression, but we do not have laws that will protect this freedom of expression. And we are on the mercy of the judiciary and the government in powers and the state administration, whether they would really exercise their wisdom, their morality, their constitutional morality in order to distribute, or for that matter, make citizen part of the freedom of expression. The other important aspect is that the Constitution makes it very clear about the scientific rational thought to be propagated among the people of India. But what we see over a period of time, or rather it was very much there, the whole revivalist movement in the British India was all about re-inscribing the ritualistic practices in the public sphere, the ritualistic practices that were subscribed by the Brahmanical camp. And they are re-inscribed in the public sphere as a part of the so-called nationalistic character, or the so-called part of the cultural nationalism, which is a Brahmanical cultural nationalism. But irrespective of the fact that the scientific rationality, the temperament of the scientific rationality comes in the Constitution, the state somehow and the political parties at the helm of affairs fail to fulfill that responsibility and fail to create India as a just society. Even for that matter, even the claimed civil society also have faced the tremendous problem of not coming out of their normatives and presuppositions. And these normative and presuppositions are the biggest stumbling block in order to make Indian society as a just society and make constitution work at every level, at every in every respect. What is produced over a period of time is a mithyavadi Sanskriti. The mithyavadi Sanskriti does not empower a citizen of Republic of Government of India to think rationally and think humanly. The inhumanness embedded in that mithyavadi culture and the syndrome is so enormous that it does not actually, irrespective of any education, I mean, we claim that we are an educated society. We claim that we are very developing society and all those things. But what is an outcome of that, the development? The outcome of that development is that India has become a fantastic labor supply country. Fantastic labor supply country. Take anyone. You have IITs, you have PhDs, you have doctors, you have all kinds of people, and they are hired everywhere. And there are also people who are unskilled laborers, who are unskilled laborers, who are also uneducated laborers, and they also go and outside work in the labor market. So India is a fantastic labor supply country. That is one of the big achievements India has made. And that achievement also could be possible, especially the one who are so-called educated lot, who have gone and because of the education, because of the education, they could achieve that kind of an export, create, make themselves into that export labor, labor market, international labor market. And they are the one who are also advocating this Mithyavadi Sanskriti. So there is a complete insensitiveness of the citizens of Republic of Government of India towards the constitution and constitutional morality. How do you do that? How do you inculcate that? In order to counter this Mithyavadi Sanskriti, neither the policy makers nor the so-called thinkers, or for that matter, the so-called intellectuals, the claim academic intellectuals, have really produced any text that will counter their own presuppositions and normatives. Apart from that, the Mithyavadi Sanskriti paved way in order to develop another Sanskriti, another culture, and that is culture of defamation. That is Vitambanavadi Sanskriti. Kisi ko bhi, you just defame anyone, you just torment anyone, you just make a character assassination of anyone. This is called Vitambanavadi Sanskriti. And it is so shocking that the state, which has the responsibility of distributing equality, distributing dignity, distributing or making a society, a just society, a rational society, are completely immune to this phenomenon, and rather there is a tacit support to such endeavors and to such attempts all the time in the public sphere. So the public sphere is so much ghettoized. There is no public sphere towards the constitutional morality. There is no public sphere towards realizing the goals in the constitution and making our nation as a healthy nation, as a livable nation, as a respectable nation, and a good nation. So what is being produced is the Vitambanavadi Sanskriti, which empowers certain characteristics and empowers to enact violence all the time. So the hate, anger, and violence are so much embedded in both the Mithyavadi Sanskriti and the Vitambanavadi Sanskriti, which is against the basic tenets of the Constitution. The Constitution gives space for everyone, no matter whether you wish to believe in God or not, no matter you wish to practice your religion or not, no matter which religion you wish to practice, no matter what are the things that are, whatever cultural practices you wish to make, or whatever celebrations you wish to make. But a tacit support by the administration to the Mithyavadi Sanskriti and the Vitambanavadi Sanskriti completely demolishes the very expectations and the working of the constitution in this country. What do we have? The recitation of preamble in the minds of the public, in the minds of the in the minds of the young children doesn't exist. Rather, the chants are the whatever jajekars you make about the country does not empower them to think differently and talk about the preamble or realize those ideals to be practiced in the society. So the whole aspect of Maitri, which Dr. Ambedkar talks about, it so much dependent and interrelated with the aspect of Karuna. So there is a difference between Karuna and Maitri. Karuna and Daya. Daya is a pity. And Karuna is to fix the problem, realize, to understand the problem of the society, the sorrow of the society, and you provide solution. Daya is a pity. Say, for example, it's a very simple thing. A person who is hungry, you give him food out of pityness. But you don't try to fix the problem, why he is hungry. So what are the requirements? And therefore you need to fix this problem for every citizen of Republic of Government of India. That is what is Karuna. And without Karuna, you cannot have Maitri. Without that compassion, you cannot develop a friendship, you cannot develop a respect. And this is exactly what Dr. Ambedkar makes in his annihilation of caste, where he advocates this whole idea of rules and principles. And he makes it very clear, like what is a basic thing. He says that rules are practical. They are habitual ways of doing things according to prescription. But principles are intellectual. They are useful methods of judging things. Rules seek to tell an agent just what course of action to pursue. Principles do not prescribe a specific course of action. This is what he advocates in Annihilation of Caste. And then the question, how much we really make use of this particular logic in our everyday practices and in our everyday analysis. Why it is not realized in our everyday life? Precisely because we are so much ghettoized and ruled by our presuppositions and normatives. I have not seen, I'm sorry to say this, I have not seen any intellectual in India producing a critique of a self. And why it is so? That is because the caste Hinduness will never empower to produce a critique of a self. And caste Hinduness is all about ingrained hate, anger, and violence. And this epistemic violence, and under the garb of the so-called fulfilling the responsibility under the constitutional means, the power is exercised to torment the constitutional ideals and the ethicality and morality which a society has to follow, which a society has to inculcate. The inculcation of ethicality, morality based on the constitutional principles are completely bypassed in the educational structure and in the pedagogic structure of this country. The contradictions are never addressed. The life of contradiction, which Dr. Ambedkar talks about in 1949, in the Constituent Assembly, they continue to get carried even in the post 26 January 1950. And even now they are continuing. And therefore, these contradictions, which are not just social and economic, but also cultural, the culture of mythic, the culture of Mithyavadi Sanskriti, the culture of defamation, the culture of Vitambanavadi Sanskriti are the one which are not resolved. And unless until these things are not resolved, we cannot become a just society or a livable society. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Elone. Whenever we listen to you, it is always inspiring. Also, in a certain way, you also, positively, I would say, provoke us to think about the idea of presupposition, which is a really theoretical and philosophical idea. And despite of the Constitution and the democracy, how this presupposition does exist in Indian society in a different name, in a different culture, in a different way. And the concept that you use, inspiring also in a certain way, you also positively, I would say, provoke us to think about the idea of presupposition. I think really theoretical and philosophical idea, and despite of the Constitution. I think someone is hearing the YouTube as well. Can someone stop it if it is the case, so that we can, otherwise there is an echo. There is my voice. I was listening again. It was repeated here. So anyway, it was great talk, Professor Elone. The point that you were making, it was mithyavadi and vitambanavadi. This word need to be again clarified and translated into a proper way by which everybody would get the idea in a detailed way, and in a way actually it helps us to understand in what way we all are ingrained. The word that you had said caste Hinduness, I mean, it is so relevant to the present time. And also the point that you made, it was critique of self, and in a way your provocation challenge to whole intellectual life, that in what way people call themselves as intellectual, by referring to Dr. Ambedkar annihilation of caste and how intellectuals should guide to the society. And in a way, in other words, I would say how intellectuals should be. The point that you made, it actually take us to a different direction by which intellectual would actually become responsible, ethical, and moral in order to actually talk about this issue. Thank you so much for this brilliant point and philosophical point. Now, I would request Professor Samina Dalwai to speak, and Samina Dalwai teaches at JGU, JGLS. Over to you, Professor. Yeah, please unmute and
Jadu, can you ask the IT people to make her a co-host, because I think she is still facing this technical problem.
I don't know how to do that.
She is muted. I think, she just has to unmute.
Thank you so much, Jadumani. I am the one who's actually on YouTube also. I am in an extremely strange predicament. Now you can hear me, but I can't. So if you want to say anything to me, please write in the messages. Okay. Now, I would like to begin. My talk is on Ambedkar and Dalit women's activism and how that connects to constitutionalism and democracy. The research started with questions around Dalit women's activism a few years back, when me and a historian friend of mine started looking at Ambedkarite women in comparison to Gandhian movements women, with RSS women, with communist women of the same period. And we wanted to see what kind of idea of India, the vision of constitution that Ambedkarite women have in comparison to women activists of this period, the last nationalism period women. And these four we were trying to look at. But today's talk is actually a response to two questions. When my piece on Dalit architecture came on 6th December last year, someone asked me, there were two questions asked to me by different colleagues. One was, why is Ambedkar not as women-centric as Phule? Which is a question that is being repeated by feminists, and I will come to that. The second one was, why is he presented as a staid, stern, preaching man? Everywhere you have the same kind of putala, the statue with with a preaching kind of a note, and the constitution in his hand. Why? What kind of a person is he? What kind of husband, comrade is he? And I thought I'll write about this. So I have today missed the opportunity to write, but I'm so happy to actually be presenting this to a group of people who are already quite informed on this. Dean Sudarshan, Sunaina, Sukumar, Professor Alone, all of you, and obviously my colleagues, Swapnil, Anurag, and Jadumani, who are well informed on this. And so I hope I can bring out some stuff that is new. So I thought I'll take this further to see what kind of a leader was he and how he became a Baba Saheb from Bhimrao. So let's begin with Phule, the first question. It is true that Phule actually, as the young students say, sets up couple goals very high for all of us. He has that warm, equal conjugality with his wife Savitribai. They did a lot of stuff together as comrades. And he has this, he always spoke as the masses as Stri Purush, where Stri was before Purush. And he always spoke of people as Stri Purush. He was very compassionate outlook towards women's sexuality, the fallen woman of the Brahmins. You know all of this, so there is nothing new in this. His education started for girls and boys together. There was nothing like, let's educate the boys first and then let's go to the girls. He did not want women to wait and then wait for that bright light to come and society to accept. He was a radical. He started it off, and like a blast, things changed in his small circle that he was trying to propagate his work in. Now, as so some of the work that I read are, and they will be mentioned, much of it is actually Marathi autobiographies of Dalit women, and they will be, the names of them will come. So, but I go to Sharmila Rege's Madness of Manu, which is a very pretty blue-looking book, in which he says that mainstream feminism falls short in understanding the difference between Phule and Ambedkar, a man who is a Bahujan and one who is Dalit in this period. Phule was 100 years before, but still when Ambedkar was struggling, a man who has, so there are very differing access to resources, to education, to entitlements, to property, daily humiliation and poverty of not just yourself, but the whole Samaj. And that has to be taken into account when one is talking about the conjugal model that either of the man could live with. So she says, that Ambedkar, the belief that Ambedkar did not envisage a public role for his wife, and that tells us about his idea of a role for women in public life or in society. Actually, to answer that question, she states that his first wife, Ramabai Ambedkar, is known as Ramai to the Dalit masses now. So she mentions all of these interesting spaces where I have been in Bombay on 6th December. There is a whole mela where you walk around and you find books, cassettes, CDs of songs, of povada. And in all of this, Ramai is ever present. And she's a mother to the to the figure of Baba, which is Ambedkar. So the Baba and I, mother and father figures, come up again and again. And she's not seen as a mute spectator or a mute mother figure, but she's seen as a tough mother that the working class families know, where the women run the families, and with their tight fist. So she ran a household in his absence. She's seen to be keeping the family together in his absence. She raised children, many children who were of the brothers and sisters. She was running a big family, and then later she helped him building a movement by her domestic role. Now, her role is not seen by herself or as as the community as something which is only a wifely duty, like the pativrata dharma. It's not like that. It is a samaj ka kaam. She's doing all this because she understands the potential of this man, who's her husband, to build a movement and drag her society from darkness to light. And in that, then by supporting him, she is doing what she can do for the community itself, rather than just being a wife in support of her husband. So this is different. And in this kind of thing, it is not the exclusive conjugality between husband and wife, which was being propagated to the nationalist elite, the middle class Brahmins in Maharashtra, through the British idea of conjugality, where the husband and wife are sitting on a table and drinking tea, and the wife must have education enough to ask intelligent questions of her husband. That kind of conjugality is actually not there in Bahujan Dalit families or in communities. And so what she's doing is seen as a mother in this kind of a context. She's also seen as reprimanding him. So there is a story, and I have seen this repeated somewhere else, that she was not always very happy with him, and so she would reprimand him, and he was scared of her, as a husband should in a good relationship. So one time she said, she retorted in the family home that when he was a Siddharth college professor, when he had returned and he was in employment in Bombay, he said, "Can you eat pustaka khatat ka? Can you eat books? What about the family? And all the money is going away in these books which are just lying around here and there." And she was very mad and quite angry. And so he left. He left and returned after 2 hours, laden with bags, with fruit, vegetable, fish. He went quietly into the kitchen. He kept the bags, went back to his usual chair, sat there, and waited for the stamp to pass. Then she saw all that. She smiled. The women cooked and they called him. And there was a happy meal in which everyone laughed at how he went, how he came back, how Bhabhi did this thing, etc. So all of this tells us about a different kind of family setting also, where the patriarch as God has no resonance. We can also see a very touching period, very painful period in Dr. Ambedkar's life after Ramabai passed away. He became a bhikkhu. He shaved off his head. He donned the Buddhist bhikkhu attire. And in grief and in guilt, because he was away for a long time when he was sick, when his wife was sick and away in education, and he must have felt the guilt. And all of this shows us compare this to Justice Ranade, who married a young Ramabai Ranade in a couple of months after his wife died. So we are comparing this to Brahmin reformists to see the feminist underpinnings of Ambedkar's life. What made him Baba? So my second thing is, what is the specific impact that he has on Dalit women activists? What does he say to them? How does he connect with them? So his perspective on caste come very connected to gender. In his caste patriarchy, the idea of his analysis of caste is cruelty to women and degradation of women. And so he sees this in the girl child, the way daughters are treated, how they are married off, the treatment of child brides, the treatment of deserted women, and especially of widows, and the utmost inhumanness with which all of these people are treated. So all of these women are treated. In Dalit women's autobiographies also, we see this again and again, especially the earlier ons, which are starting in the 1930s, and then go on to very latest autobiographies. The earlier ones tell us the very painful, heartbreaking stories of how very girls were married very young, and the 12 and 13-year daughter-in-laws are given back-breaking work. They are starved. Starvation in the household was very, very common for the bahus. This was connected to, there are stories where a mother who has just birthed a child has gone to the field of makkah corn, and she's eating it raw. Then other women see it, they realize that this is what you feel when you have birthed a child, so they are trying to then bring food for her. But all of this is connected to poverty, as well as connected to severe patriarchal practices within a household of the husband's household. The women are beaten up physically, which was a very routine. They are constantly kept under suspicion of their sexuality, where they are looking, where they are going. They were given, so all of this is within the household, where all the Garti women, the household women, are married women. Then there are girls very early on given to to the Devdasi tradition, where they are married off to the god, and through that route they enter prostitution. They cannot say no to sex to anybody in the village once that has happened. So with all of this, there is superstition, and so it's interesting how this can be seen. It is the same patriarchy, because we nowadays, in the past 10 years or so, I have been hearing this term Dalit patriarchy, as if it's a different patriarchy, as if Dalit patriarchy is based on something else. But I don't agree with the term itself, because it's the same patriarchy, really. It is the same thing where Sita, Savitri, all of these women are the ideals of women who are Brahmin or Bahujan, Maratha, or Dalit. And so they are following the same traditions of Brahmanical patriarchy, where they are fasting and praying for philandering, violent, drunk husbands. They are treating him as God. They don't have the moral courage to say no to something that the husband is doing, because they are beaten down in spirit by patriarchy. So in all of this, there is also this superstition in which the spirit possesses a woman. It possesses men also, but mostly it possesses women. And many a times these are mental illnesses. Then there is a bhagat, who's a priest, who will come to beat up the woman. She is tied to a tree. Then it is saying, ghost, you leave. Hey, zhad sod, nigunza, run away, etc. So all of this, that was part of life that Mukta Sarvagod calls Mitli Kavade in her autobiography. It means the closed doors opened when the movement for emancipation started and the new light came into the Mahar Basti. I'm talking about Maharashtra, so I'm using the word Mahar for a Dalit community there. Then there is also Kumud Pavde's Antasphot, which is inner blast, that says that these ideals of Pativrata and ideals of all of these changed, because we were asked, why do you pray for this god that doesn't really like you, doesn't want you to enter the temple? And then what are you praying for? If the god doesn't want to really meet you. So all this started changing. In Baby Kamale's Jine Amuche, that life, our life, she says that message of Buddha, the message of compassion of Buddha, entered the Basti in the 1940s, and it changed a lot of life of women. And so when you say, see the changes from that generation to the next generation, the generation of Urmila Pawar, when she's writing her Aidan, which is translated as The View of My Life. That is the generation that is 1950s born. And you see that difference. that compassion has come. There is a fight towards against superstition. There is a fight to stop giving young daughters to God and to prostitution. So all of this, and I'm not saying that Ambedkar is the only one who spoke to women particularly, because Gandhi also does that. He speaks to women as the true satyagrahis. So you have everyone starting to speak to women, but Ambedkar did that in interesting ways, where he puts the onus of changing society on mothers. So he's saying in one place, why are your children treated so inhumanly? When you are, as mothers, you possess so much more courage, so much more care and love than maybe your upper caste counterparts. Your children have no right to humanity just because we are born to you. What is our fault that we are bearing this punishment of untouchability? Now, you mothers, you must stop either giving birth to children, or you wash off this blot from us. Please decide that you will not live with this kind of humiliation. I think it's an interesting message to a woman who's at the bottom of a social hierarchy, that she can actually do something, that you rise, you do this. It's not for men, that you do this and the men will do it and women are just there. Women are their shadows. No, he's speaking to women directly. These are your children. Change lives for them. And I think it's a political message to mothers, but to women. And he says, then part of this, one may agree, may not agree from a feminist lens to what he's trying to say. There are, we can have disagreements, we can have debates. So here he's saying that caste is not marked on your body, it's not marked on your skin, it is on your clothes, it is on the way you wear so much silver on and so many necklaces, the way you wear your clothes, the language you use. And so to try and obliterate the distinct differences between you and the upper caste, which marks you as the lower caste, try to do away with that. So he says, change your the way you wear your sari, the way you wear your hair, all of that. But there is also stop eating cattle, which is dead, stop prostitution, educate your children. That's a message all the time. So there is a small story which I thought was very touching. Geetabai Pawar's interview in the Pawar and Moon book, We Too Made History, at the end, is where she recalls this meeting in Bombay in 1942, where she met Dr. Ambedkar in person. And he said, my sisters are looking so beautiful, they're looking so nice, who will call them Maharni? That meant that Maharni is a derogatory term for Mahar women. And he had tears in his eyes, women all cried, and he told them, always be like this, my sisters, educate your daughters. When they came back, that message of educate your daughters resounded in their mind, and it went to the basti everywhere when women returned to their homes. Living a neat and
you can
life
end
is
now.
a political duty. It was not to make yourself beautiful. It was to make your community rise above the living, which was subhuman. So how does all of this, and I don't have to say why people were good clothes, good fare, sitting on the ghodi, carrying your barat through the village. All of these are considered an insult to the upper caste, for which a Dalit could be punished. So saying you be nice looking, you live clearly, cleanly, etc., is actually again a powerful message. The last I come to my last part, and Jadu is telling me, as I have asked him to tell me, that I should end. So I want to then look at the last point, which is, what is then Ambedkar's message of democracy and constitutionalism, and who did he message this? Who is that message meant for? In all of his Hindu code bill, he is trying to actually look at the propertied class. Inheritance of property from your father is for the women whose fathers have properties. Why was he focusing on them? I think he's a feminist, but he also imagines that agency of women will, in time, dismantle the caste system. I'm not sure that has actually seen the truth of the day, because women's interests are aligned with their own groups. And so agency of women, even when they are educated, even when they are employed, even when they are earning money, has not actually helped to dismantle the caste system, then who are the inheritors of his vision? So the last bit where I have looked at
Can you
Dalit Women
conclude now,
Speak
ma'am?
Out, which is the
You have already spoken
book
more than
which
20 minutes.
interviews 500 women and speaks of their violence against them, sexual violence, physical violence, etc. And in that,
Can you
I feel
conclude
these
now?
women
You
who
have
don't
already
accept,
exceeded
they
20
fight.
minutes.
Despite unspeakable violence, they fight, they go to the village elders, they go to the police station, and they don't accept their place at the bottom of social hierarchy. By not accepting their place, which is caste ordained and gender ordained, they are the true inheritors of this idea that people are equal in a democracy, and the constitution is envisioned through these kind of people who are going to fight for their right to live and with dignity. And I feel they are the true inheritors of Dr. Ambedkar's vision. Thank you so much.
In our campus itself, we'll have some physical program where we'll have a different kind of engagement and intellectual engagement. And thank you everyone for participating in the conference, the seminar, and the memorial lecture. And first of all, I would like to thank Professor Register Sridharan, and then Professor Thorat, and many technical staff. Then Anurag Bhaskar, our co-organizer. Then Professor Sudarsanam, Sukumar, Professor Y. Salone, then Samina Dalbai, then Sapnil Dhanraj, and many others. Those who have joined this discussion, this very small initiative. Hopefully, in the future time, we'll have a very good program.